Hello, how are you? Here I will help you sleep with a crime story that has happened with the sound of comfortable rain. Of course, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for the good of all of us. Let's get started. Story 1. Remains found in a San Francisco Bay Area canyon on Saturday are those of Michelle Lee, the missing nursing student who disappeared in May. Molly McLaren. 23-year-old Molly McLaren from Kent in the UK was a warm, bubbly, and popular young woman. One of her friends said, "If she became your friend, you were friends for life." Molly was in her second year at Kent University and studying health and fitness, which was her main passion in life. Having battled bulimia, she was determined to overcome her issues and take back control. She even launched a blog talking about her recovery and offering support to others going through the same thing. Her mother said that although outwardly she was confident and positive, inside she was still quite reserved and could often feel insecure. But this didn't stop her from throwing herself into her studies, and she was on course to get a first-class honors degree. In the summer of 2016, Molly joined the dating app Tinder, and it was on this site that she started talking to 25-year-old Josh Stimson. They spoke for around 3 months before meeting up in person and quickly began a relationship. Stimson was open about his battles with bipolar disorder and even ran a marathon to raise money and awareness for it. Saw him as someone she could help and hoped he would be there for her too. Although initially the relationship seemed to be going well, Molly's friends and family soon started to see a change in Molly and how happy she was. Josh had started becoming controlling, and he eventually quit his job to spend more time with Molly. He started turning up at her house uninvited and developed a problem with her spending time with other people. He started taking video recordings of her and tried to stop her being alone with her friends. This was a sign for Molly that she needed to spend more time on her studies and focus on herself. She decided she needed to end the relationship. While on an evening out with friends, and with Josh exhibiting more controlling and emotionally abusive signs, she decided to break up with him. Although she said she felt guilty for doing this publicly, she also felt safe around her friends and in a public place to do this and knew it was the right time. Josh took the news badly and began a tirade of abuse on social media towards Molly and would tag her parents in posts. He accused her of taking drugs amongst many other things. He continued to send her obsessive and abusive messages, and Molly texted a friend saying she was afraid of him. Her mother Jo decided enough was enough and took it to the police. At this point, with no criminal record, the police could only advise Molly to avoid all contact with him and keep track of everything. They did contact Josh, however, and told him if his behavior persisted they would be forced to arrest him. A few days later, Stimson joined the same gym where he knew Molly had applied to work and continued to bombard her with messages and calls. The police spoke to him for a second time. Around 5 p.m. on June 27th, he bought a knife from an Asda in Chatham. He then bought a pickaxe from a nearby home base 24 minutes later. Things then weren't very quiet until Molly posted on Snapchat saying she was out for a meal and drinks with some friends. She thought nothing of this as Stimson had been blocked on everything. While she was out, however, Stimson turned up and Molly felt so violated and uncomfortable that she left early. The next day at around 10 a.m., she headed for a morning workout at Pure Gym at the Dockside Retail Park in Chatham. But the atmosphere quickly changed. At 10:25, Stimson arrives outside the same gym. He momentarily turns around on the stairs but comes back up and starts working out next to her. She sends messages to her friends and mother saying he's just turned up. "I feel like I'm looking over my shoulder all the time." Molly's mum Jo tells her to leave straight away and come home. She has a brief conversation with Stimson before he leaves, again pausing on the stairs for a moment before heading outside. Molly waits a few minutes to leave the gym herself. The events that transpire soon after are nothing short of horrific. Just after 11 a.m., Molly McLaren got into her car in the car park of the gym where she was ambushed and attacked by Stimson, who had been waiting for her. She was stabbed 75 times in a frenzied and brutal attack. In full view of the public, a passerby tried to save Molly by attempting to drag Stimson out of the car, but he was so covered in blood that the member of the public couldn't hold on to him to pull him out. When the police arrived, Stimson said, "She's in the car. I've killed her." It turned out that Stimson had gotten someone to keep track of Molly on social media, and that's how he knew her whereabouts the whole time. Her friends and family would hear about it on the news. Her mother said the second she heard the story, although they didn't confirm the name. She knew instantly it was her daughter. On June 30th, 2017, Josh Stimson was charged with murder. He claimed diminished responsibility and said he couldn't remember anything about the attack. The trial was set for the 23rd of January 2018, and on the 6th of February, was found guilty of the murder of Molly McLaren and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. Molly McLaren was 23, beautiful and intelligent. Her life full of promise ended by Joshua Stimson, the young man she met on a dating app whose response to their relationship breaking up was to plan her brutal murder. This was a narcissistic individual who was evil and should be locked up for a very long time, and I think 26 years does reflect that fact. Her parents accepted her university degree posthumously and went on to set up the Molly McLaren Foundation. It aims to raise awareness of eating disorders and help with funding for charities, who provide support to people suffering from it. A fitting tribute to Molly McLaren. Meta Valentine Meta Price Valentine was born on January 1, 1971. She was a deeply spiritual woman and a loving and doting mother of 3 children. She regularly attended church and Bible study groups and was the secretary of the Deliverance Praise Church of Worship. She lived in the Sycamore Park complex in Fayetteville, North Carolina. On October 29, 2014, Meta was reported missing by friends in her Bible study group. When the police began to look into it, they noted that on the evening of the 28th of October, Valentine's mother said she had received an odd call from her daughter. She said that she had been, quote, speaking in riddles. This was around 10:30 p.m., and this was the last anyone is known to have spoken to her. Upon watching the CCTV footage from outside her complex, it showed that 5 hours before this call was made, she returned home. At around 5:30 p.m., she is seen walking back to her apartment from the complex front office. She pauses. She is then seen rushing into the apartment with someone getting out of a car and running in after her. This person would eventually be identified as her on-again, off-again boyfriend and father of one of her children, Reginald McDowell. Having been on and off since school, they had a rocky and tumultuous relationship. According to court documents, in 1999, McDowell kidnapped Valentine and her boyfriend, Kenneth D. Thompson. Thompson was bound and gagged and had been forced into the trunk of Valentine's car. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison in 2001 and was released early in 2011. McDowell and Valentine resumed their relationship when he was released. However, 11 days before she went missing, she had ended the relationship again. McDowell initially cooperated with the investigation regarding what had happened on the night of the 28th of October, but eventually stopped talking to the police. He moved out of the area and cut off all contact and communication with his relatives, including his own son. Valentine's pastor said that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she was scared of something or someone. She would ask people to walk her home from church and would often take different routes to remain under the radar. Foul play was suspected, and in March 2018 McDowell was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping, but unfortunately no one could locate him. The district attorney said that due to probable cause, he is the only suspect in the case. And what our family really wants folks at home to know is she's a mother, she's a sister, she's an aunt, and she's a grandmother, and her family just wants her back. It's just hard because, you know, I always wanted her dead when I got married. I don't have my kids and stuff like that, you know, and I'm hoping it's still a chance that happens. If she could take care of you, she would try to. She loved to eat, which is why I love to cook. Today showing us the last Facebook message she sent him the day before she disappeared. It says, "Hello, my chipmunk. I love you very much. Your mother misses you." Police think he may have traveled to New York, but whenever and wherever he is found, he will be arrested and brought back to stand trial. He remains at large to this day, and no trace of Meta Valentine has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Meta Valentine, then please contact the Fayetteville Police Department or Crime Stoppers. Tips can also be submitted anonymously online. Israel Keys. Police believe that Israel Keys' violent crime spree began around 1996 and only ended when he was caught in 2012. Born in Utah in 1978 into a large Mormon family, Keys was one of 10 children. He was homeschooled and would eventually consider himself a fundamentalist Christian. Between the ages of 3 and 5, his family moved from Utah to Colville and lived in a one-bedroom cabin with no water or electricity. It was here his family met and became friends with a white supremacist and later convicted murderer called Chevy O'Brien Kehoe. In 1998, joined the U.S. and served until he was discharged in 2001. He was said to have been quiet, although he would often drink, heavily consuming whole bottles of bourbon to himself. While he lived in Washington, Keyes admitted to murdering 4 people and killing another person in New York. He said once he started there was nothing else like it. He also admitted to many bank robberies across Texas and New York and set someone's home on fire after robbing it. He said he killed a woman in New Jersey and also broke into a couple's home, sexually assaulting the woman and killing both of them. His final victim was 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. She worked at a coffee hut called Common Grounds in Anchorage, Alaska. On the 1st of February, 2012, Israel Keyes entered the hut and ordered an Americano. When Samantha turned back around, he had a ski mask on and was pointing a gun at her. He orders her to turn off the lights and then gags her and forces her out of the coffee shop and into his car. He took her back to his house where he kept her in the shed for the rest of the day and subjected her to a horrific sexual assault and then killed her. He left her body in the shed for 2 weeks while he went on a family cruise. After the cruise was over, he committed more burglaries across Texas before returning to his home where he set a plan in motion, which would lead the police straight to him. He took Samantha's body, applied makeup to her face, and sewed her eyelids open with fishing wire before taking photographs of her holding a newspaper asking for $30,000 in ransom. After this, he dismembered her and dumped her body in Matanuska Lake. In March, he flew to Las Vegas and hired a car to drive to Arizona. He used the disguise as he withdrew $400 from Samantha's account using her card. The security camera picked up the rental car. Just 2 days later, her debit card showed it was being used again in Texas. The police were already looking for the same car that had been spotted. On March 13, police officers spotted the car wanted in connection with Samantha's disappearance outside a motel. When Keyes left the motel, the officer followed him. In his car, he had Samantha's debit card, the disguises he had used at the ATM machines, and a roll of money he had stolen from a bank. He was subsequently arrested and flown back to Alaska. It would be a while before Keyes admitted to anything, but when he finally agreed to talk, he said he would only tell them the details if they promised to not let anything slip to the press. He said he didn't want his daughter to read about it in the papers. "If you think I want to be indicted or charged with any of the crimes, then you're wrong. I mean, you told us that we're trying to avoid that, right? Right. So I have my information. Well, let's just say what happens if Vermont says, we thought this guy was cooperating. What if they were to say we're going to charge him? So then you get charged in Vermont. Well, they're going to have to wait their turn, I think, or I shouldn't think of it. About half of what I thought we had an understanding on, from the very beginning hasn't worked out in my favor. Granted, some things haven't worked out in your favor, but I just think at this point, I just don't see what incentive I have to tell you anything else. I've got, day to day, I got day-to-day issues, and we come over here and we sit in this room. And I still don't know what's going on with, like I say, with everything that we've talked about. So talking about other crimes, we wanted to kind of pick up where we left off on some things, give you any information that you might be thinking about over the last few weeks, right, related to that. And I think we had some updates on the New York search and things like that, so why don't we start there? Okay, and also, though, the live feed, I wanted to jump into that. Because I know we came over on Tuesday, and we had it set up, we had a couple guys up in Tupper Lake to go over the bankruptcy, a bit of a drive. In all fairness, I never set up a specific day, but it actually would have worked because my attorney didn't show up till that afternoon. 2 months after she had last been seen, the police finally recovered Samantha's body. He eventually confessed to multiple horrific crimes while awaiting trial and said he chose the victims completely at random. The police believe there could be up to 11 victims and possibly even more. On May 23rd, he appeared before a judge at a hearing to set a trial date. He broke free from his steel leg shackles and jumped into the first row of seats. Officers had to taser him. On December 2, 2012, Israel Keyes committed suicide by cutting his wrists and strangling himself. He left a suicide note that read "Ode to Murder" under his bed. He had drawn 11 skulls in blood. It is likely we will never know the full extent and story surrounding the victims of Israel Keyes, but investigators continue to follow up on leads and use Keyes' own confession to try and piece together as much as they can. Michelle Lee was a 26-year-old nursing student from San Diego, California. Studying at Samuel Merritt University, she was working at the Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in the San Francisco Bay Area. She worked on the maternity ward, which she loved. Michelle was close to getting her degree in nursing and was excited for the future that lay ahead. Alongside nursing, she was also a part-time accountant and worked hard to balance everything. Her mother had also been a nurse but had tragically died of cancer in 1999 when Michelle was just 15. She took on the maternal role in her family, looking after her younger brother and cousin. She never struggled to make friends and was a very popular young woman. Kind, caring, smart and hardworking, nursing was the perfect fit for her. 2011, on a quiet Friday evening, Michelle was in the middle of a clinical training session. This was the final class she needed to complete in order to graduate, and finishing this would complete her internship. She told the supervisor she quickly needed to head to her car to get some medication. Michelle never returned, and the instructor was deeply concerned. She headed out to the parking lot with a security guard to try and find her. She saw Michelle's white Honda drive away. Although the instructor called out after her, the car never came back. People at the hospital tried to contact her, but they only received text messages back, one of which said she was heading to Reno and wanted to be left alone. With only a day left of her internship and with graduation just a short while away, this made no sense to her classmates. Her purse, wallet and driver's license were all still in the break room. The hospital security guard found blood on the floor of the parking lot where Michelle's car had been parked, and it became apparent that something deeply sinister had happened. Fortunately, the police quickly located her car the following morning thanks to a theft and recovery tracker, and it was parked half a mile away in a parking lot of an apartment complex. Inside the car was a lot of blood, and it was clear that Michelle didn't leave the hospital of her own accord. Police found a hospital ID badge in the car, but it wasn't Michelle's. It belonged to someone called Katie Miller. Katie had only just enrolled and was yet to start at the hospital. She was in Hawaii at the time of Michelle's disappearance. So who had stolen Katie's ID, and how had they done it? Her family and friends were baffled, and no one had any idea as to who would want to Michelle. Michelle's best friend Giselle Esteban came forward and told police that she had seen Michelle that night at the hospital along the walkway. Giselle had gone through school with Michelle and had been hoping to study nursing alongside her until she fell pregnant and had it with her boyfriend Scott. Unable to balance it all, Giselle dropped out of school, and her and Michelle eventually started to drift apart. Giselle was at the hospital that night getting a scan as she revealed to police she was pregnant for a second time. She told the police that Scott and Michelle had been an item, and the investigators needed to look more closely at him. There was a lot of CCTV around the hospital, and if Scott was involved, the police felt certain he would have picked up on camera somewhere. While they were checking the cameras, Scott was interviewed about what he said was a platonic and friendly relationship with Michelle. He appeared very open, honest, and forthcoming. The cameras from the parking lot had hundreds of hours of footage across several cameras. At 6:55, the cameras picked up Michelle crossing the walkway, just as Esteban had said. Nothing appeared wrong or out of place, but the only camera pointing at her car wasn't connected properly and showed nothing. They finally see her car, but the driver cannot be made out. Inside the building and tracking where Katie's keycard had been scanned, they spot something. A woman is seen around the hospital in various locations wearing a baseball cap covering her face. She is seen trying and failing to get into several rooms. She manages to get into one with Katie's keycard. She turns off the lights, grabs a lab coat, and picks up some files. In this moment, they realize who it was. It was Giselle Esteban, Michelle's best friend. Giselle was brought in by police for formal questioning. She was standoffish with investigators and covered her face the whole time. The shoes that she had worn that day tested positive for Michelle's blood, and Giselle's hair was also found in Michelle's car. Her ex-boyfriend Scott told police that Giselle had threatened him and Michelle's life for talking to each other. Even without Michelle's body, the police had enough to charge Giselle Esteban with murder. They believed that Giselle had become so obsessed with the idea of Scott and Michelle being together it totally consumed and enraged her. She arrived at the hospital that morning claiming she was interested in joining the nursing course, and after being let in by someone, she waited for the secretary to leave, before she stole Katie's keycard and the roster telling her where Michelle would be working. She returned that evening and waited for Michelle to head in on her own. She had attacked and killed her in the car park before driving away to dump the car and Michelle's body. Human remains found in a San Francisco Bay Area canyon on Saturday are those of Michelle Lee, the missing nursing student who disappeared in May. Police declined to release any further information, saying only that the remains were identified after tests by the Alameda County coroner. Lee was last seen alive while taking a break during classes at Hayward Hospital, May 27. Earlier this month, Giselle Esteban was arrested and charged with Lee's murder. Police say cell phone signals from both Lee and Esteban had been received from the same area where the remains were found. They believe Esteban attacked Lee in the hospital's parking garage. During a court appearance Monday, Esteban did not enter a plea, but was appointed an attorney. September 10, 2011. 10 days after Giselle was arrested, the police find the skeletal remains of Michelle Lee. Around the body were her white scrubs that she had been wearing the night she vanished. Giselle was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years. Scott, who already had 80% custody of their daughter, continued looking after her, and the baby she birthed in prison was given to her parents. Michelle Lee had an enormous impact on everyone she came into contact with. Her friends, family, and colleagues are determined that her memory will live on. Story 2. Hillary and I made a promise that we wouldn't rest until Hannah's killer was brought to justice. 4 years later, that promise is still a long way from being honored, but we are no less determined. Our lives are now totally preoccupied with achieving justice for Hannah, and this responsibility is physically and emotionally exhausting. Hannah Claire Foster was born on August 31, 1985. She lived in Southampton, England with her parents Hillary and Trevor and her younger sister Sarah. Hannah was a hard-working and high-achieving 17-year-old. She was completing her A-levels and was preparing to study medicine at university. Her ambition was always to be a doctor, and her teachers describe her as a gifted and straight-a student that could have excelled in anything she put her mind to. Happy, smiling, and sociable, Hannah was popular amongst her peers and had a bright and promising future ahead of her. Friday, March 14, 2003, Hannah had made evening plans with her friend Helen to go out for some drinks in Southampton. After they had finished their night at a bar called The Hobbit, they left together and were spotted on CCTV just before 11:15, walking down the high street. Hannah walked Helen to the bus stop, waited until she got onto the bus, said her goodbyes, and carried on walking. Hannah's house was only half a mile away, so she continued on. At around 5 a.m., and with Hannah still not home, her parents sent her a message. She always let her parents know if she had planned on staying out later than expected or if she was staying at a friend's house, and with nothing to confirm either of these were the case, her parents were deeply concerned. By mid-morning, and with still no response, her father made the call to the police. With this being so out of character, the police acted quickly, and their first point of call was to look into Hannah's phone. Fortunately, her phone was still on and emitting a signal. Every time her phone got a text or call from her parents, it pinged off several different locations, and the police began to piece together where she might be. Panic set in when the team realized on the evening of the 14th of March, a 999 call was made from her phone. When the phone call was connected to the police, it was passed on to an automated system known as the silent solutions when the operator couldn't hear any sound on the end of the phone. The system was then disconnected, and there was still no response from Hannah. What also alarmed the police was that her phone was evidently moving rapidly. And this could only mean one thing: it was in a vehicle. This was further corroborated when they played and enhanced the call that was made to 999 that had lasted less than a minute. They could tell from the tape that she appeared to be in a vehicle a lot larger than a standard-sized car, and whoever was in the vehicle with her was an older male with a South Asian accent. Whoever this man was, he was ordering Hannah to keep her head down. It was obvious they were now dealing with an abduction, and every moment was crucial. Signal towers put the phone between Southampton and Portsmouth in the early morning of Saturday the 15th of March, but the phone was now stationary and somewhere in Portsmouth. Using cell phone towers and checking every corresponding location, just 24 hours later, people's worst fears were realized. Hannah's body was discovered in some bushes on Allington Lane, on the outskirts of Southampton. She had been raped and strangled. The semen found on her clothes was put into the National DNA database, but did not come back as a match with anyone. Following the signal tower pings, only a day after this awful discovery, another finding was made. In a recycling plant in Portsmouth, Hannah's bag and phone were retrieved. The hunt was now on to find the mysterious man in the vehicle. Using CCTV alongside the cell phone tower data, the police determined that Hannah's abductor would be linked to one of only 7 vans. The case was moving rapidly, and thanks to a huge tip, just a few days later the police would find the man they were looking for. 41-year-old man and their pal Singh Kohli was an Indian immigrant who was also living in Southampton. He was married with 2 children and worked for Hazelwood Foods as a sandwich delivery driver. Crime Watch launched an appeal using reconstructions, asking for help with any information about the vans, times, or locations in question. A supervisor of Hazelwood Foods contacted the police with his suspicions surrounding Coley. He said that his delivery route was consistent with the area in question, and when he came back to work the following day, he had a scratch on his face, and left early due to what he said was a bad back. The police wasted no time in following this up, and when they ran his details, they found his name was linked to one of the vans they were looking for on the CCTV footage. Cell phone tower blocks put Hannah's phone near the M27 and M275 in Hampshire, and the CCTV footage showed Coley's van traveling down these stretches of motorway. It also showed him at the recycling center around the same time Hannah's phone stopped moving. When they located and seized his van at his place of work and inspected it, they found blood and semen in the back, both of which matched what was found on Hannah's clothes. Mananderpal Singh Coley had gone from being a person of interest to the only suspect. On March 18th, the police's case took a massive blow. They arrived at Coley's address to arrest him, but found the house completely empty of everyone and everything. Coley had left the UK and traveled from Heathrow to Delhi. Coley's wife told the police he had flown out to see his dying mother and did not know when he planned on returning. Little did the police know this would set in motion a 5-year-long battle to bring Hannah's killer to justice. For just over a year, the case stood at a standstill. Indian police services weren't able to make Hannah's case a priority, and the coverage in the media was sparse and short-lived. The police wondered if Coley's immediate family might be hiding him somewhere and supporting him financially. That theory quickly faded when Coley's own father told the media that if his son had committed these crimes, he needed to face the consequences. He assured the media he would never protect him. "I say if he has committed crime, hang him. I will be the last person to protect him. If he has done this crime, he should be punished and he should face the consequences as per law. I will not protect. And if he's innocent, God will protect." In July of 2004, Hannah's parents, Hillary and Trevor, took matters into their own hands and made the 4,000-mile trip to Chandigarh, India to put Hannah's case on the map and locate Mananderpal Singh Coley. Their heartfelt appeals would reach the ears, eyes and hearts of over 1 billion people. During the 10 days they were there, they started a telephone hotline for anyone with information about Coley and made an abundance of press conferences. Hannah's case was now firmly in the public eye, and a reward of 5 million rupees was offered to anyone that could help find Coley. And by this time, everyone was looking for him. A taxi driver saw Coley's face in the paper and reported to police that he had been in his cab. He told him that he was on holiday from the UK, that he worked as a delivery driver, and his name was Mike. He had formed an entirely new identity and had even married another woman, despite it being bigamist. In a televised interview on July 28, 2004, Coley confessed, "I abduct, raped and killed Hannah Foster. And I want to unburden myself. I totally want to tell the truth what happened there that night. She was crossing the road. I was coming out of the Mitre pub. My van was parked on the same road where she is walking. And I just picked my van and I came, on the other road and I saw her again. Then I stopped my vehicle, and I abducted her. I was totally drunk that night. That my mother is very ill in India. I want to go to see her as well. And it is very, very bad luck for me. That I was totally blank that night. My head was, and I'd done that crime, and she was not, agreed. And I just, strangled her, like just on the hole that way, and put a hand on that almost and killed her." He said he had been drinking heavily the night he abducted Hannah, and when he saw her walking down the street, he grabbed her as she went past his van. After he carried out a horrific attack on her, he said he had no choice but to kill her as she wouldn't promise to not report him. As quickly as he'd made it, he would retract this statement and claim he was forced to say it. He was held in custody in New Delhi, and the next 3 years were long and arduous. Hannah's grieving family waited on news of Cody's extradition to the UK so that justice could finally be served. In New Delhi, the case underwent 100 court proceedings and was appealed 35 times. "This delay is unfair on us. And if the accused is innocent, just as unfair on him. No one is benefiting from this delay. Nobody can get on with his or her life until the decision is reached on extradition. It can't be allowed to drag on indefinitely." 3 years later, in June of 2007, The call was finally made to extradite him to the UK. And as soon as Cody touched down at Heathrow Airport on the 28th of July, he was arrested and charged with kidnap, false imprisonment, rape, murder, and perverting the course of justice. But the trial would not prove simple. Despite the evidence against him, including his own admission, Coley pled not guilty, forcing Hannah's family to relive the horrors of the case. The trial began in October 2008 at Winchester Crown Court. He would later change his statement and claim he was forced to rape and kill Hannah because a gang of criminals made him do it. These protests of innocence would prove futile, and he was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 24 years. Well, perhaps the end of the city nightmare. Of course, it's too early to tell. But also time for closure for the family of British teenager Hannah Foster, raped, murdered 5 years ago. The Indian taxi driver, Mindarpal Singh Kohli, accused of raping and murdering her, was today sentenced to 24 years in jail in a UK court. This is 5 years after he committed the crime. The 17-year-old was raped and murdered after a night out in Southampton in March 2003. Kohli will in all probability walk out of jail after serving his recommended minimum sentence and resume his life in the outside world. This man callously deprived Hannah of her primary human right, the right to love. This sentence gives him the right to a second chance at love. The second chance he never gave Hannah. Despite Kohli's relentless attempt to cover up his crimes, creating a new identity and life in another country, and his attempts to pervert the course of justice, the truth eventually caught up with him. Thanks to the tireless work of the police in both the UK and India, an incredible battle that the Foster family fought for Hannah, justice was finally served. Story 3. It's pretty clear to us. We don't believe she went off the road. We really don't believe that. No, exactly. She's not that stupid. She's not that stupid. You really have to make an effort to get lost. And they're really not going to do that. Lisanne Frum was a positive, intelligent, and passionate young woman. She was a keen volleyball player and loved the outdoor life. Chris Kremers was 21 and was described as a creative, reliable, and responsible girl. As well as living together, they worked together at the same restaurant. Being a year ahead of Lisanne had graduated with a degree in applied sciences from Deventer. And Chris had just finished her studies in cultural and social education, specializing in art education at the University of Utrecht. The girls had spent 6 months planning and saving up for a 6-week-long trip to Panama. This would be both a vacation and a chance to expand their skills and education. They planned on spending time hiking and enjoying the views, alongside volunteering with the local children, learning Spanish and teaching the arts. This was an incredible opportunity for the young women, and they couldn't wait to get there. Chris and Lisanne boarded a plane from Amsterdam to Costa Rica, and from there they boarded a bus to Panama. On the March 15, 2014, the girls arrived in Panama. They toured for almost 2 weeks before settling in with a local family on March 29. Just before midday on April 1st, they took one of the host dogs named Arzel and set off for a hike near the forest that surrounded the Baru volcano. Before they left, they met for brunch with some of the other Dutch tourists and were spotted by several people around the town. They then headed to a route called the Pianista Trail, not far from where they were staying. The hiking trail was popular with tourists and locals alike. With its breathtaking views and landscape, it's easy to see why. They were on social media frequently and spoke about their hiking plans for the day on Facebook. Later that evening, the dog returned home, without Chris and Lisanne. There had been no contact with the girls all day. This was extremely concerning, as they had both been in regular contact with friends and family via phone and social media since the start of their trip. The hosts were scared that something sinister had happened and contacted the National System of Civil Protection, or the NSPC. However, for unknown reasons, this was not followed up on straight away. The first search for the girls was actually conducted by local volunteers that knew the area well. The following morning, both girls missed an appointment that they had made with a local tour guide, and another day were passed with no sighting or word from either of them. Finally, on the 3rd of April, an official area search of the hike began. Volunteers were on the ground on foot, and also searching. The girls spanned a vast area, and with a peak height of over 1,800 feet. A thorough search would take a substantial amount of time. 3 days later, the parents of Chris and Liz arrived in Panama to help find their daughters. Police, sniffer dogs, and the girls' parents embarked on a 10-day-long search to find them, and $30,000 was offered as a reward. The girls' parents didn't believe they would have veered off the set path, and it just didn't make any sense to them. "We're going back. It's pretty clear to us." "Well, we don't believe she went off the path. We really don't." "No, exactly. She's not that stupid. You really have to make an effort to get lost, and they're really not going to do that. If something had broken, they would definitely stay on the path. There are no steep hills or ravines along the path where you can stumble and not be seen anymore. It's good to have believed it yourself now. A whole lot. And we can see with our own eyes that you can't go anywhere if you walk on the path. The only thing you do when you think it's too late is turn around and go back." Exactly. Although police and locals were searching the area, and the search moved quickly, nothing would turn up and more questions than answers arose. For 10 weeks, the case was effectively cold until one of the locals found the first key piece of evidence on June 14th. A backpack, later identified as Liz Ann's, was found along a riverbank in Alto Romero. This was around a 14-hour walk away from the trail that the girls had embarked on. The bag was in perfect condition. It wasn't wet or damp, and appeared to not have been damaged by the elements. The woman who found the bag said although she couldn't be sure how long it had been there, she was positive it couldn't have been there long, and she hadn't spotted it in the days before. In the bag was $83 cash, 2 pairs of sunglasses, Liz Ann's passport, Chris's medical insurance card, an empty water bottle, a camera, and both girls' bras. Also inside were Chris and Liz Ann's mobile phones. Everything inside was in perfect condition, neatly packed and undamaged by the weather. The rucksack wasn't high-end or especially waterproof, and questions surrounding how the bag and the contents had stayed in such good shape in a humid and wet rainforest for the last 2 months started to be asked. There were also many sets of fingerprints found on the bag, but these were never fully analyzed, and it remains a mystery as to whose they were. Fortunately, when the phones from the backpack were switched on, they still worked perfectly. The authorities were able to start painting a picture of the hours leading up to their disappearances. Only a few hours after they set off on their hike, a call to 112 was made from Chris's iPhone 4. Dialing 112 from any country in the European Union will connect you to emergency services. 10 minutes later, Liz Ann's Samsung was used to make another 112 call. It was clear that something had gone terribly wrong only a few hours into the hike. On April 2nd, Liz Ann and Chris made 4 more attempts to call both 112 and 911, and on April 3rd, another call to 911 was made from the iPhone. Due to the reception, only one of these calls briefly connected, and that was only for a second before it was cut off. It was clear that after 5 a.m. on April 5th, the Samsung battery eventually ran out, but Chris's iPhone continued to hold power until noon on April 11th. Between the 7th and the 11th of April, there were 77 attempts made to try and call the emergency services. All of these calls tragically failed. After April 6th, a passcode to the iPhone was inputted incorrectly multiple times, and it was determined that the correct PIN was never entered again. The passcode for the iPhone was entered incorrectly so many times that this possibly indicated Liz and may have been attempting to access Chris's phone after her own battery had died. Or, after 8 days in the wilderness, dehydration and hunger could have been the reason that Chris couldn't focus to enter her PIN correctly. But after over a week with what could have only been a few snacks and limited water, it was remarkable that one or both of the girls were still able to use the phone at all. On the 11th of April, the iPhone was turned on and then off for a final time at 11:56 a.m. The camera and the rucksack added more pieces to the mystery. At the beginning of their hike, they had taken a massive amount of photos of themselves overlooking the Continental Divide and happily following the trail. Nothing appeared out of place. The girls seemed happy and carefree, and it was bright and warm outside. The final photo taken in the afternoon shows Chris heading down the trail. On April 8th, a total of 90 photos had been taken using the camera flash. These were all taken between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m. The majority were pitch black. The photos showed random areas of woodland, water, and sky. The police had several theories. Firstly, that the flash of the camera was being used to illuminate the area to guide them through. Secondly, they were using the flash to scare away wild animals that may have been encroaching. Thirdly, Either both or one of the women could have possibly been attempting to take photographs of distinctive parts of the forest to help lead someone to them if the phone was found. One of the images showed what appeared to be either plastic bags or wrappers stuck on some sticks on a large rock. Another photo showed what appeared to be a mirror on the ground. Alternatively, these photos could have been for themselves to get their bearings back during the daylight and help retrace their steps. The final theory is that the flash was being used to draw attention or direct anyone that may have been in the area or looking for them. There was a large search party out on the 8th of April, and flares were being shot up into the sky to try and locate the girls. The flash of the camera was possibly being used as a distress signal to lead the party to where they were. The amount of photos that had been taken looking up at the sky would further add weight to this theory. Disturbingly, one of the photographs showed the back of Chris' head with what appeared to be blood on it. This raised another theory that maybe Chris had fallen and injured herself early into the hike, and after failing to get a reception to alert the authorities, Lizanne had left with Chris' phone to get help on foot. However, Chris may have succumbed to her injuries, and Lizanne fell victim to the elements, dehydration, or both. Out of all the images taken over the day in the early hours of the morning on April 8th, only one photo was deleted and was unable to be recovered. Image 509 in the order the photos were taken, the deleted one in question would have been around the time the flash started being used. It will never be known what this image was and why it was deleted, but it is possible that this photo could have been one of the keys to solving the case. These photos, combined with the attempts to reach help, pointed to a series of terrifying and distressing days for Chris and Lizanne. Following the discovery of the backpack, Chris' shorts were found on a rock a few kilometers from where the bag had been located. There were inconsistencies surrounding how the shorts were found. Some reported that they were neatly folded up, and others said that they had just been flung over the rock. 2 months later, a tragic finding was made. A human pelvis and a hiking boot with a foot inside was discovered. At least 33 human bones were found shortly after. They were scattered in different locations along the riverbank, almost a 12-hour walk away from where they were last known to have been. Suspected human remains and hiking boots found during the search for 2 young Dutch women have been confirmed to have belonged to the girls. 2 different types of shoes and bones were found last Thursday as search teams stepped up efforts to find the girls who disappeared while hiking in Panama. DNA tests concluded that these were the bones of Chris Kremers and Liz and Fruin. Chris' bones were bleached, presumably due to the conditions surrounding them. However, some people questioned whether or not the bleaching was down to the natural elements or was man-made. Among these bones, the police found the remains of 3 other unidentified people. The final and remaining searches were often hindered due to bad weather, and this also meant that using cadaver dogs drew a blank. Poor weather and lots of rain makes it incredibly difficult for dogs to locate and follow scents. People speculate to this day that the girls were met with foul play, killed along the hike, and their remains were scattered over a massive area. Killed by locals, kidnapped by a gang, and even murdered by cannibals are still among the theories on the internet today. But the police say they doubted any of these theories, and foul play was ruled out. Although the full picture of what happened over those 11 long days will never be known, the police believe they have come to a few conclusions. Investigators and locals found that it would have been virtually impossible to lose sight of the trail and wander off course, due to how rigidly yet simply it was laid out. It was also a very popular tourist trail, so if something had happened along the way, it is fairly likely they would have been found and received help at some point. So, if the girls did choose to totally go off the trail, they would have had a reason for it or deliberately taken a different turn as opposed to unknowingly making a mistake. One part of the trail, however, was seen as a potentially hazardous spot, and if you leant over too far, there was a chance for someone to slip and fall over 40 meters into the riverbank below. If you followed that same river along, this was actually where a lot of the girls' bones were discovered. A local knew the trail well and identified this area as somewhere that would have been almost impossible to get back out of should someone have fallen into it. Speculations that they had fallen into the River Caliber were squashed by the Kramers' family lawyer and Reich Orocha. With no damage to the bones and the low levels of water in the river at the time they disappeared, he claimed that this just didn't stack up. A Panamanian forensic anthropologist said of the girls' remains, "There are no discernible scratches of any kind on the bones. There are no marks on the bones at all." The investigating officials were come under fire for how the case was conducted. People wanted to know why it hadn't been investigated sooner and why certain things hadn't been analyzed for DNA or fingerprints. It will never be known what happened during those 11 harrowing and traumatizing days. But it is obvious that the girls fought tirelessly to save themselves and get help. Chris Kramers and Liz and Frum had clearly battled incredibly hard and had seemingly strategized as best they knew how. Their family and friends still search for answers and have never given up hope that they might one day find out what happened to Chris and Liz and on the Pianista Trail in Panama. Story 4. It's a cliff on both sides. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. All camped out, everything was awesome. I woke up, and I woke him up, and I said, "Where's Lauren?" And he said she got up a while ago. He was like, "But I mean I didn't feel her or anything." And I said, "Okay, have you seen her since?" And he said no, and I asked how long, and he said he wasn't sure. Honestly, I wasn't really worried about it, because I didn't think anything of what happened. We were like, well, maybe somebody came and got her. And then we went down to the boat dock and we waited and waited and waited, and it almost seems like I'm a suspect right now, but I know you guys were just doing your job. She didn't have her shoes. She didn't have her keys, wallet, phone, and she would not leave without that stuff. Lauren Agee was a 21-year-old student from Hendersonville, Tennessee. She lived with her mother Sherry, stepfather Michael, and her 3 siblings. She was in her second year studying criminal science at university and had recently started a great relationship. Popular, outgoing, and sporty, Lauren was thriving in all aspects of her life, and she showed a lot of promise for her future. Mid-July 2015. Just a few weeks shy of her 22nd birthday, Lauren told her mother Sherry that she had been invited to go to Wakefest on the last weekend of July. Wakefest is a 3-day-long festival based at Center Hill Lake in Nashville, Tennessee. People compete in wakeboarding tournaments and water sports during the day and party and dance throughout the night. For sporty and sociable Lauren, this was an exciting opportunity, but her mum Sherry wasn't as keen on the idea. Sherry quizzed her daughter on the details, including who she would be going with. Lauren said she was going with her friend, Hannah Palmer. Sherry didn't entirely trust Hannah because of how much she was in and out of Lauren's life and felt very uneasy about the situation. However, on Friday, July 24th, Lauren and Hannah headed off for the festival. Sherry said as soon as her daughter started walking to the car, she begged her to come back for one last hug. She told Lauren to be careful and to take care. Lauren and Hannah were on social media documenting their road trip while en route to the festival. They arrived at Wakefest in the late afternoon, and sometime after the girls met up with Aaron Lilly, Hannah's boyfriend, and his friend, Christopher Stout. Although the girls both knew Aaron, this was the first time they were meeting Chris. According to witnesses, Chris was attracted to Lauren and appeared glued to her. But she was in a happy relationship and she wasn't interested. They all drank, danced, and partied in the bars into the late evening. Upon the group deciding to head to bed, Lauren received a shock. She was under the impression they would be sleeping in one of the cabins or on one of the houseboats. However, for unknown reasons, the sleeping arrangements were far from that. We're in a canoe. It's a cliff on both sides. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. We're doing a good job. They were actually camping at the top of a narrow cliff that stuck out over the water. Although it was never set up to be a sleeping location, it was common knowledge amongst everyone that this was somewhere you could go and camp if you chose to. Over the years, festival attendees had tied a rope to the trees that led to the cliff to help people reach the top. A few other people were camping up there as well, but Lauren's group consisted of Hannah, Aaron, Chris, and another slightly older man, Brixner Gambrell. Lauren had only packed a sleeping bag for the night, and it was evident that this new sleeping plan was not something she had prepared for. The cliff itself had a 90-foot drop down one side and an almost 50-foot drop down the other. The boys had built a tent for Hannah and Aaron to sleep in and a hammock for Chris and Lauren. This bothered Lauren as she had already made it clear that she wasn't interested in Chris. The hammock was suspended between 2 trees over the edge of the cliff, and this was undoubtedly hazardous and dangerous. The next day, Saturday the 25th, the group headed off for some more of the same, watching the water sports, drinking, dancing, and partying. At some point during the day, the group allegedly decided to do some cliff jumping. The cliffs in the area were steep and high, and the water was filled with hidden rocks. It was alleged that when Lauren jumped, she hit the back of her head and was left unconscious for a few seconds. Despite this, Lauren seemingly recovered and appeared back to her normal self later that evening. The group carried on into the night and nothing seemed to miss. As the evening rolled round, another friend of Lauren's named Cassie Franks, who was also at the festival separately, said she bumped into Lauren's group at the bar in the marina. Cassie was also the ex-girlfriend of Aaron Lilly. She, along with many others, said it was very apparent that Aaron's friend, Chris Stout, had taken a liking to Lauren, but the feeling clearly wasn't mutual. She reported that she felt like Lauren was having to put up with Chris, almost acting as Hannah's wingman. Lauren also raised her concerns with Cassie about going back to sleep on the cliff that night. Cassie knew the fear that Lauren was feeling all too well, as she had spent a night up there a few years prior. Lauren was so nervous that she asked Cassie if she could stay with her group instead. Cassie said she had to decline as they had no more room. At some point during the night, Lauren sent texts to one of her friends saying that she wanted to come home and was no longer enjoying herself. She said her friends were being mean to her and she just wanted to leave. Eventually, the group decided to call it a night between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. The next morning, Hannah, Aaron, and Chris said they all awoke to find Lauren missing. Her belongings were all still by the hammock, but Lauren was nowhere to be seen. However, they didn't raise the alarm. They said that they had just assumed she had simply headed off down the cliff to start enjoying the day without them, but she'd left her shoes, phone, and purse. So although possible, this theory didn't seem to make much sense. Sherry was now panicking as she hadn't heard from her daughter since the Saturday, and it was now Sunday. She began frantically calling and texting her daughter, but to no avail. Tragically, at 4:30 p.m. that Sunday, a fisherman and his son made a gruesome discovery. Lauren Agee was face down and floating in the water. It was evident that she had been dead for some time. The police arrived on scene and began a recovery process. While this was happening, Aaron Lilly paddled around a corner in a canoe and went straight over to the police. He asked if they had seen his friend, as she had gone missing. Harry and Deanna Elder, a couple who were also on the scene, said this encounter played on their minds. There had been no announcement to say that a body had been found in that location, and the timing of Aaron's entry onto the scene seemed odd. One of the officers on scene would later say that he believed Aaron had staged this encounter, and that the group likely already knew where Lauren's body was. Aaron, Chris, and Hannah were all brought back to the mainland and questioned. According to police, Aaron and Chris's demeanors appeared nervous. Aaron was overheard telling the others not to mention anything and to let him do the talking. Neither Aaron, Chris, or Hannah mentioned Brix and Gambrill in their statements. Although no polygraphs were ever performed, they were all questioned individually, and the stories and accounts that the three had began to change and differ massively. Despite all of Lauren's belongings being there, Aaron Lilly claimed that she had stayed at the bar in the marina and never came back to the cliff with them. This was disputed by Detective Chris Yarchik. He was an off-duty police officer working as security for Wakefest. He remembered seeing all four of them in a canoe heading for the cliff that night, sometime around 2:30 a.m. Aaron Lilly would later change his story and said that he believed Lauren had headed off to the cliff to meet an old boyfriend. Hannah Palmer told the police that Lauren had left that morning and joined a boat of unknown people. She assumed that she had gone to spend the night with them and would return in the morning. However, during a Skype interview, would later say that she wondered if Lauren had gone to the toilet during the night and fallen off the side of the cliff. As for Chris, who Hannah and Lauren met that weekend, Hannah explains why she didn't call Lauren's parents and authorities that morning when Lauren was gone. That Skype interview was interrupted by Aaron phoning Hannah, telling her to end Christopher Stout's written statement. He referred to Lauren as and said that Lauren had returned to the campsite for only a few minutes before saying she was leaving to meet an ex-boyfriend. He said he had then fallen asleep and didn't feel her get out of the hammock that they were both in. Just one day after the festival had ended, he spoke about how good the weekend had been on Instagram, showing no signs that anything sinister had occurred. In the background of the shot, Hannah and Aaron are also visible. It remains unclear as to whether or not Brixton Gambrill gave any form of statement. Some of the interviews were recorded and the group could be heard giving various different accounts. Do you think she went back after y'all went to the cliff? I honestly don't know. My honest opinion is she got up to go to the bathroom and slipped. You know, we all drank, had a good old time. Eventually, we ended up making our way all the way back to the camp. I woke up and I woke him up and I said, "Where's Lauren?" And he said, "She got up a while ago." He was like, "But I don't mean, I didn't feel her or anything." And I said, "Okay, "Have you seen her since?" And he said no. And I asked how long. He said he wasn't sure. I know she probably went to pee, but she didn't have her shoes, she didn't have her keys, wallet, phone. And she would not leave without that stuff. An autopsy was carried out and determined that Lauren's cause of death was blunt force trauma and possible drowning. She had a broken nose and fingers, and her body was bruised and battered. It was also determined that she had very little water in her lungs despite being submerged. Her blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. She also had some distinctive markings and impressions on her body, including a triangle shape on her chest. Detective Chris Yarchik, who had watched her leaving that night, also helped in the recovery of Lauren's body. He said that he saw what he believed to be a bite mark on her chest, as well as substantial bruising to her thighs. He suggested at the time that a rape test kit be done, but no such test was performed and her body was never swabbed for DNA. 911 calls were lost, text messages were erased, and recordings of some interviews weren't made, and the crime scene was completely contaminated. It was eventually concluded that she had fallen down the side of the cliff while intoxicated, and her death was ruled as an accident. It was also determined that there was no foul play involved, and it was nothing more than a very tragic drunken incident. With this, DeKalb County Sheriff's Department closed the case. Sherry's gut instinct told her that this was wrong and begged for the case to be re-examined. These requests were all denied. Hannah Palmer, Chris Stout, Aaron Lilly, and Brixton Gambrell were never considered suspects by the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department. Hannah and Aaron married and moved to Florida, where they had a baby. Chris Stout was in and out of jail due to various parole violations and DUIs, and Brixton Gambrell moved out of state and obtained a lawyer. None of them attended Lauren's funeral, and none of them have commented or publicly engaged with the case since it closed. Cassie Franks, Lauren's friend and Aaron's ex-girlfriend, agreed with Lauren's mother Sherry, and she had concerns about what had happened that night too. She said that Aaron was violent with her during their relationship, and that he had choked, bitten, and beaten her. Cassie had taken pictures of her body after these attacks, and even offered them to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department. However, they declined to look at them, stating the case was closed and Aaron wasn't a suspect. Aaron also had a history of DUIs, as did Chris Stout. Just days after Lauren had been laid to rest, Sherry received a phone call from Ryan Mallinson, an officer with the White County Police Department. Ryan, along with Chris Yarchik, was on scene when Lauren was found. Sherry said that he told her the investigation was not handled correctly and he believed that the people she was there with were somehow involved in her death. Sherry then spoke with both he and Detective Chris Yarchik. Both were deeply concerned by the behavior they had seen from both investigators and Lauren's friends. Aaron and Chris expressed no sympathy or concern for Lauren. Just their body language and demeanor toward the incident told me that there was something wrong with the picture. People don't act like that unless they know something or they have something to hide. Hannah, Aaron, and Chris continued to party for the weekend and were active on social media, despite the fact that Lauren was missing. Yarchik believed that the strange triangular print upon her body was a match for the tip of a canoe, exactly like the one he saw them heading off to the cliff in. However, that theory was quickly thrown out by the sheriff's office. They said that the mark had been made while pulling her onto the rescue boat. Yarchik, among with many others, believed that Lauren had already died when she went into the water, which could have explained the lack of water in her lungs. However, as Yarchik wasn't an officer with the investigating department, he had no authority to reopen the case. He did, however, encourage Sherry to pursue it. Off the back of this, Sherry hired a private detective by the name of Sheila Wysocki, and her first course of action was to have Lauren's autopsy notes re-examined. This second look concluded that Lauren had hemorrhaging in her throat. According to Sheila, the hemorrhaging was a result not of being strangled, but of being held down. Sheila also wanted answers from the police regarding the rape test kit and why one hadn't been carried out. The answer she received was that because Lauren had been wearing a tampon, she couldn't have been sexually assaulted, therefore no such test was deemed necessary. Sheila discovered that Lauren wasn't actually menstruating at the time. She contacted Lauren's GYN practitioner, and they found that the lining of Lauren's uterus confirmed she hadn't been on her cycle. Sheila also disputed the details surrounding the infamous cliff jump in which Lauren supposedly hit the back of her head. She argued that while Lauren did jump off the cliff, she didn't go into the water head first, nor did she pass out, and there was no bruising. Sherry, Sheila, and Chris Yarchik also ran some experiments and tests using a 105 pounds crash test dummy. The dummy was thrown off both the 90-foot side of the cliff and the 50-foot side. On the 90-foot side, the current of the water at the time wasn't consistent with where Lauren's body had been found. If she had fallen in, she would have floated towards the marina in the opposite direction. The drop on the 50-foot side was so filled with ledges, trees, and rocks that it seemed impossible to roll continuously to the bottom without something getting in the way. They used the crash test dummy almost 50 times, and every time garnered the same result. She slipped and fell down here. Could she have made it into the water? There's too many trees here. There's too many rocks. There's just no way. I mean, you could maybe make it to halfway down where it flattens out. In an unscientific demonstration, he shows us his theory with a mannequin. Similar size and weight, 105 pounds dummy, and I'll just drop it going forward. It was caught in the branches, didn't even make it down to the bottom. Correct, it's not even halfway down. A witness named Chris Brown came forward and said that he had seen who he was sure was Aaron Lilly on the night Lauren was last seen alive. He claims that at around midnight he saw Aaron coming out of the water, spluttering and spitting water out for several minutes. Aaron said that he had almost drowned swimming over to the marina area. This tip was turned over to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department, and they advised that should they want to pursue this lead, they would be in contact. But that call never came. His statement remains a gray area, however, as the time frame of midnight doesn't match up with the 2:30 a.m. time that the majority of witnesses talked about. During an interview with Crime Watch Daily, the family's private investigator Sheila Wysocki said that she had been following up on some false stories that had been circulating around social media. She said some of the information was coming from an IP address in Florida, matching the same street that Hannah and Aaron's house was on. Sheila and Sherry believed that this was no coincidence. Sheila was convinced that the answers lay with Hannah Palmer, Aaron Lilly, Christopher Stout, and Brix McCambrill. In December of 2016, Lauren's family filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit against the four of them in a bid to force them to talk. Aside from Chris Stout, they all ended up pleading the Fifth Amendment. Because Chris Stout was in jail at the time, pleading the Fifth may have impacted his sentence, so he took part in a deposition. This lawsuit also highlighted a lot of flaws in the handling of the case, and officers were forced to admit that a lot more could and should have been done. In March of 2017, Sherry's wrongful death lawsuit against the group was dismissed, ruling that there was insufficient evidence. Circuit Court Judge Jonathan Young threw the case out, deeming it to be ridiculous and pulled out of thin air. Sherry was told that it may only be possible to proceed if she agreed to a gagging order, preventing her from talking about the case publicly, something she felt would hinder rather than help. Their opinions were not based on any relevant scientific methods, processes, and data, and seemed to be just pulled out of thin air. Court finds that the plaintiff has not produced any shred of evidence that anyone intentionally harmed Ms. Agee. After the lawsuit was thrown out, over 20,000 people signed a petition begging for the case to be reopened. At the start of 2019, the Nashville Court of Appeals overturned the ruling made regarding Hannah Palmer's potential involvement in the case. It was unanimously referred to as a clearly erroneous assessment of the evidence. The court ruled that Sherry absolutely had a clear and legal right to sue for wrongful death. Despite all of this, the case currently sits in limbo, and Lauren's family and Shiga Wysocki continue their fight for answers and justice for Lauren Agee. At this stage, it is unknown whether or not the full story about what happened that night will be brought to light. But Sherry Smith is determined to fight for her daughter for as long as it takes. Story 5. I'm still convinced that people are lying to us. I'm still convinced that people close to Claudia have told us lies, and I'm determined to make sure that we give them the opportunity to come forward with the right information. If they continue to lie and we prove they're lying, they'll be arrested. On the February 27, 1974, Peter and Joan Lawrence welcomed their second child into the world, a little girl named Claudia. Peter Lawrence was a highly respected and successful solicitor, and the family lived comfortably in Yorkshire. Claudia was educated at the prestigious York College for Girls and by all accounts had a very happy childhood. Although her parents would later divorce, Claudia remained close to both of them. She was sociable and friendly and had a great group of friends. As she got older, she discovered her passion for cooking, and after attending a local catering college, she quickly became a qualified chef. She worked in various restaurants and hotels in York. but soon grew tired of the unsociable hours and wanted a change. Claudia was a bubbly young woman who loved nothing more than being with family and friends. So she changed employment and began working at Goodrich College at the University of York. She was well liked, and her employer described her as a reliable woman who was always on time. A year later, in 2007, she settled into the area and bought a cottage about 3 miles away from Goodrich College. Life for Claudia was seemingly going well. Close to her house was the NAG's head pub, and she was a regular there, becoming a well-liked patron of the business. Although she was close with her parents and older sister, Ollie, she kept some aspects of her life hidden. She allegedly had a series of short-term relationships, but did not share this with people. Wednesday, March 18, 2009, Claudia clocked in at 6 a.m. to start her shift at work. At around 2 p.m., it was time for her to finish, and she was seen on CCTV leaving work on foot. Around an hour later, she was picked up again on CCTV passing a shop close to where she'd lived, and she was also spotted by one of her neighbors. Shortly after this sighting, a colleague drove past her and offered her a lift home. Throughout the evening, she caught up with her friends and parents over the phone. Her mother said that during their conversation, Claudia seemed like her usual self. She was chatty and relaxed. Mother's Day was coming up, and they discussed what they wanted to do to celebrate. Claudia told her mom that as her car was out of action and being repaired, she would need to be in bed early as she had to walk to work the next day. The following morning rolled round, and as it approached 6 a.m., the always punctual Claudia failed to turn up. Her manager knew this was out of character and called her mobile to check on her. Although her phone rang, it redirected to her voicemail. Her manager took no further action. Claudia also arranged to meet her friend Susie Cooper at the NAG's head pub near her house that evening. Susie turned up, but Claudia did not. This was not like Claudia, and Susie tried to contact her. Claudia was often on her phone, a Samsung D900, and Susie became concerned when she heard nothing back from her. The following morning, Friday, March 20th, Susie tried again, but she was met with no response. She decided to get in touch with Goodrich College to see if anyone had seen or heard from her. She was deeply worried when they discovered that Claudia had not been to work for the last 2 days. Susie contacted Claudia's father Peter that day to let him know that she hadn't been to work and people couldn't get hold of her. Peter traveled to Claudia's home, where he and Susie did a search of the house. Nothing was out of place and nothing was disturbed. It looked like she had eaten breakfast, as there were dishes in the sink and her bed had been neatly made. Some recently used hair dye bottles and gloves were also found, but nothing of any real significance was there, and everything was where it should be. The only thing missing from the house was her mobile phone, a blue rucksack which she would usually take to work, and her hair straighteners. When considering everything, it appeared that Claudia had left to go to work as normal that Thursday morning, and something had happened on the way, which meant she never made it there. At around 2 p.m. on Friday, March 20th, the call was made to North Yorkshire Police to report Claudia as a missing person. Later that day, officers came to Claudia's house and met with her father. But as there were no signs of violence and she wasn't considered vulnerable, the police initially were not quick to act. The police believed that Claudia had probably chosen to go away for a few days and that she would come home soon. But just to be sure, they put out a request for the public's help and checked her usual route to work for any signs of her. But Claudia's family were adamant that she wouldn't leave without telling people. They argued it was more likely that she had been abducted. In the North Yorkshire area, around 3,500 people go missing each year. The vast majority eventually turn up after taking a few days or weeks away, and the police thought that this could have been what Claudia had done. But as time went on and no sign of her was found, and she hadn't contacted anyone, this was soon dismissed. The police had several theories about what could have potentially happened to Claudia. One theory was that she hadn't been met with foul play, but had had an accident or other medical incident on her way to work. This was soon ruled out by the police, however, as they thoroughly checked her out, and found no sign of her. Weeks would pass, and with no sign of Claudia, 5 weeks after she vanished, the police changed their inquiry. They said it had escalated from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Another theory was that Claudia had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time and fallen victim to a violent criminal or serial killer. But a conclusive result couldn't be drawn from investigating these claims, and cases of known serial killers, who could have been in the area at the time, were also looked into but ultimately ruled out. Statistically, most murder victims are known to their killers. The theory that police soon made the top of their priority to investigate was that she had fallen victim to somebody she knew, with her different relationships making her potentially more vulnerable to an angry jilted partner or something similar. The police checked the CCTV cameras following her route to work, but she wasn't found anywhere on the footage. As the case began to escalate, Crime Stoppers offered a reward of £10,000 for anyone with information. That would lead to an arrest and conviction relating to Claudia Lawrence. The police received over 1,000 calls offering a plethora of information. A witness came forward to say they had seen whom they believed to be Claudia talking to a man on Melrose Gate Bridge at around 5:35 a.m. on the March 19th. The bridge was near to Claudia's home. He claimed that the man was smoking a cigarette in his left hand and had what they said was a skinny build. He was wearing a dark-colored hoodie with the hood up and dark-colored combat trousers. The woman with him was described as smaller than the man with mousy brown hair. She was wearing a blue waist-length jacket with buttons and pockets. But nothing really came of this, and to this day the police are still following up leads for who they dubbed the left-handed smoker. The case brought the local community to a standstill, and people from all over the country were desperate for any news on the missing Claudia. One of the leading figures in the Anglican Church, the Archbishop of York, John Senemu, made an appeal for anyone with information to come forward to the police. In June 2009, Crime Watch featured a reconstruction of Claudia's last known movements in a bid to generate more information. Well, it's now 11 weeks since Claudia disappeared. There's been no proof of life. I'm treating this investigation as one of suspected murder. You see, some people might think they're protecting Claudia, and they're protecting Claudia's reputation, but it's far more important than that if indeed we are talking here about murder. You do want to hear from people who even have suspicions about other people. That would be useful to you at this stage. Absolutely. I'm not here to judge Claudia's relationships. I'm here to investigate them. I need people to share that information with me. Later that month, her father Peter launched a YouTube appeal to try and help find his missing daughter. The annual Whitby Regatta was also used to drum up publicity in the search for Claudia Lawrence. Claudia was an avid user of her mobile phone, so this became a key piece of evidence for the police to investigate. Her phone records showed that in the weeks leading up to her going missing, she had spent a lot of time in the Acoma area of Yorkshire. Claudia's phone was still on until just after midday on Thursday 19th. It was then deliberately switched off. Cell phone tower data indicated that her phone had not left the local area during the time it was on. After examining the records further, they found that on March 18th, the day before she went missing, she received a text message at 8:30, which she replied to. But just 45 minutes later at 9:15, she got another text, which she did not respond to. It was reported that the last text Claudia received was from a man who lived in Cyprus. Following on from the text message she received, in September of 2009, the police revealed that they had extended their search to Cyprus. She had holidayed there several times, and was also believed that she had looked for job opportunities there too. The man in charge of the investigation, Detective Superintendent Ray Galloway, said she knew several people who lived there and had received different job offers while visiting. He said that some of the people who had been spoken to were reluctant to offer information. Several months had passed with still no sign of Claudia Lawrence. Christmas and New Year's came and went, and her family faced their first painful holiday without their beloved daughter and sister. In March the following year, the police began searching Heslington and York, based on information they had received in the previous few days. On the 24th of that month, a muddy track near a play park was searched, and the next day the search was moved to a field near the University of York. These searches, however, would turn up nothing. It was later considered that the search had been prompted by somebody providing false information. Detective Superintendent Galloway said that Claudia's relationships and love life could provide an explanation into her going missing. A journalist for Sky TV stated this was the only missing persons case they had covered where they had been threatened and warned to stay away. Not once, but twice. After an extensive initial investigation, the most likely theory police believed probable was that Claudia had left for work that morning and that she had been abducted and murdered by a local man she knew. 4 years would pass and Claudia's family were still no closer to finding out what had happened to her. In June 2013, the North Yorkshire Police announced that they had formed a new major crime unit costing £300,000. In October of that year, they revealed they were opening several cold cases, one of which was Claudia Lawrence. The squad at the Major Crimes Unit re-examined the case and also conducted new forensic searches of her house. Science had moved on since the initial investigation, which allowed for more advanced techniques to be used. During these further tests, they found male DNA on a cigarette but in her car. 5 years to the day after her disappearance, Crime Watch aired CCTV that had been discovered back in 2009. It showed a silver Ford Focus hatchback driving along the road she had lived on. The CCTV showed that as the car approached Claudia's house, the brake lights came on. Another vehicle that the police wanted to track down was a white Vauxhall Astra van that had been picked up on a bus's camera. It was parked on the opposite side of the road across from Claudia's house, and was there for at least 30 minutes around 9 p.m. on Wednesday, March 18th. Before long, the case would take a surprising turn. DeMolin was now heading the investigation, and several arrests were promptly made. All the men arrested were believed to have either had relationships with Claudia or had insight into said relationships. In May 2014, the police arrested a 59-year-old man on suspicion of murdering Claudia Lawrence. Barely a mile from Claudia Lawrence's home, a police forensic team is at work searching through a semi-detached house after arresting a 59-year-old man this morning on suspicion of murder. But in November, he was released from bail without charge. In July 2014, another arrest was made. Paul Harris was the landlord of the Cone Pub and was arrested on suspicion of perverting the course of justice, but he too was released without charge. He explained that his only connection to Claudia had been that she had had a drink in his pub in the weeks leading up to her going missing. And apart from that, he had no relationship with her. It's almost 6 years since Claudia, a chef at York University, vanished. The man leading the case told me he's convinced some police have already spoken to her holding back. Is everybody being honest with you? I don't think people are being completely honest with us, and those particularly closest to Claudia and associates. I still think there's information they are not divulging at the minute. For whatever reason, I would encourage them to come forward. Police believe if something did happen inside Claudia's house, on a main road, the back alleyway would have been the logical route out. The focus on this alleyway brings the investigation back to where it began, back to Claudia's home. Officers say there can still be new leads and things to re-examine, even after all this time. On the 6th anniversary of her disappearance, police released CCTV that was spread through the media like wildfire. At 7:15 p.m. on the March 18th, just a day before she was considered missing, cameras near her home picked up some interesting footage. The footage shows an area near an alleyway at the back of Claudia's house. A person is seen walking towards the alley. Just over a minute later, they walk back out. Someone else is crossing the road ahead, and the person walking pauses to let them pass. The footage unsettled many, and the police urged the public to help find who these two people were. 2 key questions from police. 3 weeks previously, police had carried out a finger dip search of the alleyway, looking for possible vital clues. I'm convinced people have information that they are sat on or they've lied to us previously. So there have been 2 previous arrests, and we will continue to arrest people if we believe they're obstructing the inquiry. Come forward now. It's far too important for loyalty to someone to make you stop saying anything. We just need to know. On the same CCTV camera around 10 hours later at 5:07 a.m., someone is spotted again walking backwards and forwards from the same alley behind Claudia's house. The police wondered if this was the same person, and what, if any, relevance this bore to the disappearance of Claudia. If it was of any relevance, this could have been linked to the witness that claimed to see someone they thought may have been Claudia talking to a male that was smoking on Melrose Gate Bridge. The timing was just 20 minutes apart and in the same location by her house. In 2016, the North Yorkshire Police took the case to the Crown Prosecution Service, asking that 4 men be charged and put on trial for the murder of Claudia Lawrence. The Crown Prosecution Service refused, saying there was a lack of sufficient evidence. The 4 men had drank at the Nag's Head pub, but denied being involved in Claudia going missing. The police said that witnesses had refused to cooperate, and the second investigation was ended soon after. Stephen Fulcher was the senior investigating officer into the crimes committed by notorious murderer Christopher Halliwell. In his book detailing his work on that case, he noted the similarities between Claudia's case and that of Charnoe Callahan, who was murdered by Halliwell in 2011. He was also convicted of the murder of Becky Gooden in 2016. Citing a phone conversation recorded in prison, he claims, in which Halliwell was heard saying the police wanted to speak to him about 8 murders, a figure the police didn't recognize. Where did he get 8 murders from? It didn't come from me. I've got no idea how many murders he's responsible for. But clearly he made that indication. And when you look at everything we know about Christopher Halliwell, 8 is probably an underestimate. Christopher Halliwell was interviewed about Claudia in prison and flatly denied he had played any part in her disappearance and possible murder. The witness's account of seeing a skinny male smoking a cigarette with his left hand on Melrose Gate Bridge fit the physical description of Halliwell. Despite many people's theories surrounding Halliwell's possible involvement in the case, both North Yorkshire Police and Wiltshire Police have said there is no evidence to link Halliwell to the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence. Questions surrounding how the initial investigation was handled were asked, and people wanted to know why things hadn't moved quickly enough. After Claudia's disappearance, her father began a tireless campaign for a change in the law. In July of 2019, Claudia's law was passed which allowed for a guardian to be appointed if a person had been missing for more than 90 days. It meant direct debits could be stopped and financial affairs managed in their absence. Tragically, less than 2 years later, her father Peter died in February 2021 without ever finding out what had happened to his missing daughter. Friends and family remain hopeful that they will one day be able to answer the question, what happened to Claudia Lawrence? Peter Lawrence, Claudia's father, set up a website with all the relevant links and contact information should you wish to leave a tip of any kind about Claudia's case. I've left a link to that in the description along with some other sites you can visit to help keep Claudia's case as active as possible. Story 6. Well, listen, the Old Bailey has heard, of course, some terrible cases in its history, but this has to be one of the most disturbing that anybody really has ever sat through. The absolute depravity of what Joseph McCann embarked on in April and May of this year. The spree of abductions, sexual assaults and rapes of 11 victims over the course of 2 weeks. Starting in Watford, moving to London, then heading up to the northwest around Manchester and Cheshire, traumatizing his victims, leaving them with a trauma that they will have to live with for the rest of their lives. Born in London, England on February 8, 1985, Joseph McCann's crime spree started from a very young age. When he was a small boy, his family moved onto a council estate in Manchester, and it was around this time that his interest in criminal activity started. Aged just 11, he had his first run-in with the law, and by the age of 13, he had already been convicted for theft. He and his 2 brothers created such fear amongst the community that following multiple complaints to the council, the family were eventually evicted in 1998. As he got older, more arrests followed, including carrying a knife, criminal damage, and the handling of stolen goods. He would set fire to cars and threaten children and the elderly. Despite moving, the brothers frequently returned to their old council estates and continued what was described by the newspapers and neighbors as a campaign of terror. It wasn't long before the brothers were all issued with antisocial behavior orders, commonly known in the UK as ASBOs. They were among the first people in the UK to ever receive this. The order banned them from entering the Beswick area and exhibiting physically or verbally abusive or antisocial behaviors in the city of Manchester. This didn't appear to have much of an impact on the boys as they were photographed laughing and swearing at the crowd while coming out of court. In the Beswick area, crime fell by 1/3, and one supermarket claimed that their revenue had risen by £14,000 after the ASBO against the boys was given. Their lawyer claimed it was against their human rights, and they appealed the ASBOs 3 times. This eventually resulted in them taking it to the Court of Appeal in 2001, but these appeals were flatly denied by the court. In 1999, the McCann family moved again, this time out of the Manchester area. They moved to the south of England, where the brothers continued their criminal activities. Around 2007, Joseph was living in Bedford. He had recently become a father, but was not present for the birth nor in the baby's life, due to spending time in prison. He was released later that year, but on December 27th, he was arrested and jailed again for burglarizing an 85-year-old man's house and threatening to stab him. Fortunately, the elderly man had CCTV outside, and he was swiftly caught and sent back to prison in September of 2008. He was sentenced to imprisonment for public protection, or an IPP, in order to serve a minimum of 2 years and 6 months inside. His IPP was a form of an indeterminate sentence, meaning that when his sentence was done, the parole board for England and Wales would have to determine whether or not he posed a risk, and whether or not it was safe to allow him back out. He would be on a 10-year-long license, meaning that if any criminal activity happened in those 10 years, he would be recalled to prison immediately. While in prison, various professionals and offending managers expressed their deep concern that he still presented a huge risk to society. One statement said that he posed serious harm to the public and known adults, as well as a medium risk to children, prison staff, and prisoners. They believed that he could also be a massive threat to teenage girls and showed signs of wanting to sexually exploit them. Due to the analysis of the professionals, his many appeals for release were denied and he spent over 8 years in prison. While Joseph was doing time, his brother Sean was also serving a 2-year sentence at HMP Peterborough for assault. Sean took his own life while in prison. Joseph completed several rehabilitation courses and was eventually released on license in March of 2017. After he was released, he went back to Buckinghamshire to live with family and then quickly moved out and off the radar. This meant his offender manager was not able to contact him or keep track of where he was. Despite his long stint in prison, he wasn't deterred and the crimes just didn't stop. A few months later, he was arrested again and spent another 2 years in prison. When sentencing him, the judge told him that it would run concurrently with his IPP sentence. However, his offender manager team did not recall him on that sentence. If they had done, he would have had to appear before a parole board again before being considered for release. Unfortunately, this meant he was able to be released just halfway through his sentence. Staff at the prison contacted the probation services about their concerns surrounding the fact his sentence was not running alongside his IPP. They felt he was still evidently a very imminent threat to the public. Despite this, in 2019, he was released without appearing in front of a parole board. He continued to move around the country, evading his offender manager team's attempts to contact him. On the 21st of April 2019, his crime spree would take a much more frightening and sinister turn. At 3:30 a.m., he abducted a 21-year-old woman at knife point as she was walking back from a nightclub. He drove her back to an unknown house and raped her. Although he had told her his name was Joel McCann, he was identified the very next morning by Hertfordshire police. However, they couldn't locate him. Just 4 days later, he abducted another woman in northeast London and subjected her to a horrific sexual assault over the space of 14 hours. He was spotted casually making a stop to a drive-through with a frightened woman in the back seat. She was also still in his car when he held another woman at knife point and forced her into the vehicle. While drinking bottles of vodka, he drove to Watford with the women and attempted to book into a hotel. After he was unsuccessful, one of the women smashed the vodka bottle over his head, allowing them both to escape. Investigators drew up a list of suspects based on previous offending. But as McCann had never committed a sex offense before, he wasn't on the list. These cases weren't linked with the 21st of April attack until over a week later. Following this, a nationwide manhunt was on to find Joseph McCann, and a reward of £20,000 was put up for anyone who could help. On the 5th of May, McCann was back in Manchester. He met a woman in a bar and convinced her to let him go back to her house. Once at her house, he tied her up and raped both her 17-year-old daughter and her 11-year-old son. The daughter managed to escape out the window and ran for help, but Joseph was gone by the time the police and neighbors arrived at 8 a.m. Around 1 p.m. that day, a suspect had been arrested and taken into custody, but it wasn't Joseph McCann. While officers were interviewing the wrong man, McCann had moved on and driven to Bury. At 1:30 p.m., he abducted a 71-year-old woman outside of a Morrison supermarket. He attacked her and raped her. He stole her car, and while the woman was still in it with him, he attacked and kidnapped a 13-year-old girl. She too was sexually assaulted. The pair managed to escape at a service station later that afternoon, but Joseph carried on in the victim's car. That same evening at around 6:30 p.m., he was driving in Cheshire when he forced two 14-year-old girls into the car and threatened to kill them. He was seen driving to a petrol station and buying a packet of condoms. The two girls, although not shown, were in the back. He was on a dangerous and disturbing rampage. Fueled further by cocaine and vodka, he had no intent of stopping, and there was no limit to how far he would take his appalling crimes. Joseph McCann was now the most wanted man in the country. It was in this moment, however, that police finally caught up with him. They spotted him in his car with the two girls in the back and began chasing him. "I'm on my way, I'm on my way. Where is he? Where's he gone?" McCann crashed the car into a Mercedes and started fleeing on foot. Fortunately, the two girls weren't injured, just extremely shaken. He somehow managed to escape on foot before stealing a bike and riding away. He then abandoned the bike and booked a taxi at around 8:15 p.m. It was at this point that roadblocks had been set up in the area and the police were closing in on Joseph McCann. Cheshire Constabulary, however, did not issue a warning to say he was in the area until 8:45 p.m. A police officer stopped the taxi and unknowingly spoke to McCann, who was holding a pint glass, and said he was returning home after a visit to the pub. The officer had a description of McCann and knew he would have a large tattoo on his stomach if it was him. He asked McCann to lift up his shirt, to which McCann shouted obscenities at him and ran out of the taxi. After almost 9 hours of chasing Joseph McCann in cars, on foot and using helicopters, on the 6th of May at 2:36 a.m. he was found hiding up a tree down a rural country lane. After a long battle with negotiators, he was finally detained and arrested. He taunted the police by saying, "If you had caught me for the first two, the rest of this wouldn't have happened." He also claimed that the young girls in his car had just wanted a lift, and he was simply helping them out. He entered a not guilty plea to all the charges related to the 11 women and children. On December 6th of that same year, he appeared via video link from Belmarsh Prison at the Old Bailey Courthouse in London. Mr. Justice Edith was presiding. McCann refused to come to court and complained that he was sleep-deprived and physically couldn't make it in. Not only did he show no respect for the justice system, he showed no remorse to any of his victims. He was tried and unanimously convicted of a shocking 37 offenses. The jury praised the victims for their bravery and courage in coming forward. Joseph McCann was given 33 life sentences in order to spend a minimum of 40 years in prison for his heinous and appalling crimes. The judge branded him a classic psychopath, and his violent and horrific rampage was described as unprecedented. Police believe that for those 15 days they were hunting for him, he was using a variety of disguises, cars, and false names. He was also being hidden and protected by various associates, and 6 people were arrested in connection with concealing him. The frightening and depraved acts that Joseph McCann had inflicted on so many people and communities enraged the public. People couldn't fathom how he had been released from prison with his IPP sentence being ignored. BBC News said that National Probation Service had not followed the correct procedures, and following his 2017 arrest, he should have been made to answer to the parole board before being released. This would likely have been denied by the board, meaning he would have remained in prison. The Ministry of Justice conducted an investigation and review into what had gone wrong within the broader criminal justice system in dealing with Joseph McCann. Although not normally done, these findings were released to the public. They concluded that the National Probation Service did not manage McCann effectively or in line with the policies and procedures which set out the expectations for managing offenders who pose a high risk of harm. A very concerning case. This was a dreadful, dreadful set of offenses, and in this case I think there was clearly an individual error. McCann should have been referred to the parole board after he'd committed further offenses. They also found that the management of him as an individual was not consistent enough, with a high turnover of staff and subsequent files and paperwork that needed to be handed over being rushed. Other newspapers suggested that budget cuts and staff shortages within the NPS had a part to play in things too. After an internal investigation, one member of staff was demoted. Harry Fletcher, the former Assistant General Secretary of the Probation Officers Union, would say a recent parliamentary answer shows that one person a week is let out wrongly. There has never been a consequence as devastating as this. Story 7. Michael Haight was born on January 7, 1980 in Seattle, Washington. However, at an early age his family relocated to Cedar City, Utah following the completion of his father's dental school. As a child, Michael was a typical young boy who enjoyed baseball, basketball, and soccer. He achieved the rank of Eagle Scout and excelled in school. After graduating high school in 1998, Michael spent the summer working at a fish plant in Alaska. He quickly earned the position of line manager, overseeing more than a dozen men. His work ethic and dedication were recognized, leading to his promotion. Michael went on a mission trip to South Brazil as a dedicated member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This experience further deepened his faith and strengthened his commitment to his religious community. Upon his return to the United States, Michael pursued a degree in business at Southern Utah University, where he graduated in 2004. At Southern Utah University, Michael met his future wife, Tasha Earle. They fell in love and married in the St. George Temple on May 10, 2003. Michael appeared to be the epitome of a devoted husband and father to outsiders. He coached his children's sports teams, attended their school concerts, and spent time with them sledding and doing projects in the garage. However, on January 4, 2023, The facade Michael had built around his family came crashing down. On that day, 8 bodies were found in the Hyatt residence, leaving investigators and neighbors alike shocked and bewildered. Early that morning, Tasha Haight missed an online appointment, and Michael, her husband, failed to report for work. Their colleagues grew concerned and contacted the police to perform a welfare check at the Haight residence in Enoch. Officers arrived at the Haight residence, but upon knocking, they received no answer. As they walked around the property, the officers observed that it did not appear as if anyone was home. Knowing that the Haight's had 5 children, the police contacted the Iron County School District to verify if any of the children were at school that day. However, it was discovered that none of the children were present. When the police arrived at the Haight's, they cleared the premises to ensure no immediate danger was present. After a thorough search, they confirmed that no one needed medical attention and that there were no signs of an active threat. The Haight's lived in a single-story residence with a basement. Detectives arrived on the scene a short time later after the home was declared a crime scene. Upon entering the main bedroom, the detectives noticed that the 4-year-old Gavin was laying flat on his stomach, his head turned to the left. One of his arms was placed under his head on a comfortable pillow, while a blanket covered a portion of his body. Similar to Gavin, Tasha was only partially covered by the blanket. The detectives discovered an older woman on the other side of the bed. She was later identified as Gail Orrell, Tasha's mother. Gail was also lying on her back, her head resting on a pillow. Like her daughter and grandson, Gail was partially covered by a blanket. As the detectives continued their search of the Haight's home, they entered Briley's room, where they found the 12-year-old girl lying in bed. She was slightly inclined and partially covered with a blanket. In Amon's room, the detectives discovered a 7-year-old boy lying face down in the corner of the room. Unlike his siblings, he did not have a pillow or blanket over him. Sienna, Amon's twin sister, was found in her bedroom, lying on her left side in bed, her head resting on a pillow, also covered with a blanket. Macy, the eldest of the Haight children at 17 years old, was found in her bed, her head resting on a pillow, and her body covered by the blanket. The detectives then found Michael Haight in the exercise room in the basement of the home. He was lying on top of a sleeping bag. All 8 victims were found dead from a gunshot wound. It did not take long before the detectives concluded that Michael Haight was the primary suspect. They theorized that he killed his wife, mother-in-law, and 5 children before taking his own life. As the detectives began their investigation, one neighbor provided crucial information that helped them piece together the timeline of the crime. The neighbor told the police that she had awoken at 3:30 a.m. to use the bathroom. Exiting her room, she heard a loud bang that sounded like fireworks. However, she quickly noticed that it was past the legal date for fireworks to be allowed in the neighborhood, leaving her feeling annoyed. The neighbor continued, stating that after the initial bang, she heard 2 more in quick succession. This noise was followed by a short pause, followed by another bang. That pattern continued, with a brief pause before the next bang, and a longer pause before a final bang. Based on the neighbor's statement and the condition of the 8 bodies found inside the house, the detective speculated that the bangs she had heard around 3:30 a.m. were directly related to the events that unfolded that night. They believed that Michael Haight carried out the brutal killings during this specific time frame. During the investigation into the Haight family murders, detectives learned that an unnamed non-family member had reported abuse to the police in the Utah Division of Child and Family Services in 2020. This individual revealed that Macy, who was 14 years old at the time, confided in them about her fear of her father. That revelation sparked a further investigation into the Haight household. Following receipt of the DCFS report, Macy and her parents were interviewed separately. During Macy's interview, the interviewer learned disturbing information. Macy stated that there were times when her father choked her, and she feared he was going to kill her. She revealed that the violent attacks began in 2017, and spoke of a time when her father grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her into a wooden piece of furniture. When the detectives interviewed Michael Haight, he denied ever hurting his daughter. He dismissed the incidents described by Macy as misunderstandings and blamed his emotional state on his father's death and the recent divorce of his brother. Michael stated that he had been upset about these issues and took it out on his older daughter. Tasha did not want to press criminal charges against Michael, and the Utah Department of Children and Family Services, the Enoch Police Department, and the Iron County Prosecutor's Office also declined to press charges. They had determined that the case did not meet the statute's requirements for prosecution. Additionally, a lethality assessment was conducted with Tasha, and according to her response, it did not indicate her relationship with Michael was lethal. However, victim services were made available to Tasha and the children for several months after the case was opened. Through conversations with Tasha's friends, the detectives gained a different perspective on Michael Haight, from that portrayed to the community. According to Tasha's friends, whenever they stopped by the house to visit, they often had to engage in conversation while the water was running in the kitchen to cover up any sound. Tasha believed that Michael was monitoring her conversations and eavesdropping on them. These friends also helped Tasha clean the house whenever they came over, so Michael would have nothing to yell at Tasha about. Tasha's friends shared that whenever they texted her, she would respond with short, positive messages, seemingly mindful of the possibility that Michael might read these messages. They believed this was a way of maintaining a positive image in front of Michael, as to suggest that everything was going smoothly in their marriage. The detectives assigned to the case have learned that Michael exhibited signs of highly controlling behavior towards his wife Tasha. One way in which Michael exerted control over Tasha was by taking her car keys and phone to prevent her from leaving. Another incident that raised suspicion about Michael was his reaction to Tasha purchasing a $30 rug from Walmart to replace a soiled one. Although Tasha had a legitimate need for the carpet, Michael became furious, claiming the purchase was excessive. Tasha confided in her friends that her 7-year-old son, Eamon, was acting more and more like his father, Michael, emulating his bad behavior. Whenever Tasha told Eamon to do something, he responded, "That's not my job." This behavior was concerning for Tasha, as it reflected Eamon's lack of responsibility and disregard for authority. Often dismissed or ignored Tasha's instructions, and Eamon seemed to follow suit. According to Tasha's friends, in 2022, Tasha dared indulge in a small act of self-care. Despite the demands of her responsibilities, she decided to get her nails done, a relatively rare occurrence for her. However, her husband Michael did not allow it to happen, placing strict restrictions on her freedom. After Tasha's indulgence, she felt renewed confidence in beauty. She told Michael that she would be getting her nails done on a monthly basis, a decision that did not sit well with him. Angered by his wife's decision, Michael expressed his disapproval, questioning how much this new habit would cost. To alleviate Michael's concerns, Tasha calmly explained that maintaining this self-care ritual costs $25 per month. However, Michael remained unconvinced, arguing that Tasha was taking food from their children's mouths by spending money on her nails. His perspective was rooted in control and a deep financial responsibility towards their family. Around the same time, Tasha started prioritizing her self-care and began losing weight. After years of her husband calling her fat and ugly, Michael was furious that she was shedding pounds. He accused Tasha of cheating on him, trying to justify the sudden change in her physical appearance. Michael's controlling behavior reached new heights, as he attempted to manipulate Tasha's weight loss. He pleaded with her to stop losing weight, concerned that other men might look at her with desire. Underlying this demand were his deep-seated insecurities and desire for complete control over his wife's body and behavior. Tasha's friends also told the police about when the family kitchen table unexpectedly broke, and Tasha needed to buy a new table. However, Michael refused to give her the money to buy one. Frustrated by the situation, Tasha decided to take matters into her own hands. She chose to refinish the old table, hoping to improve its appearance and functionality. However, this act of defiance did not sit well with Michael, as he did not give her permission to do so. Michael Haight had a stingy attitude towards spending during the holiday season. Despite his significant income, he provided only $100 to Tasha for each of their 5 children to buy presents. Tasha always gave her children a fulfilling Christmas. Yet Michael received a substantial paycheck from his job at Allstate. However, he refused to allocate additional funds to his wife and children. His rationale was that he didn't see the need to provide them with more of what he believed was rightfully his. Michael's obsession with reducing waste and conserving resources led him to impose strict rules on Tasha's household habits. She had to wash out and reuse plastic bags, even if they were used once or multiple times. This excessive demand for reusing bags placed additional responsibilities and burdens on Tasha, leaving her feeling overwhelmed. Further, Michael's desire to control every aspect of Tasha's life extended to her cleaning and baby care routines. He insisted on having the cleaning and baby wipes, claiming it was more eco-friendly and cost-effective. However, This demand compromised Tasha's comfort and hygiene and created unnecessary stress. If Tasha failed to adhere to the instructions set by Michael, she faced serious consequences. He made it clear that disobedience would lead to a lot of trouble for her. This threat created a sense of fear and submission in Tasha, leaving her with no choice but to comply with Michael's demands. According to Tasha's friends, she confided in them that although Michael had been mean to her throughout their marriage, he had never extended this mistreatment to their children until the late 2010s. However, as time went on, the abuse directed towards Macy intensified, leading her to consider taking her own life. Michael had extremely high expectations for his daughter Macy. He expected her to earn straight A's all the time, even though Macy was already struggling with the weight of her father's abuse. The pressure to meet his unrealistic expectations proved to be overwhelming for Macy. Macy's friends told the detectives about another disturbing incident in the Haight home. Michael returned home one evening to find Macy with her head in her mother's lap. Angry and frustrated, Michael instructed Macy to get up and clean her room. This incident left Macy deeply shaken, as she recalled looking into her father's eyes and seeing them filled with hatred and pure evil. The detectives uncovered another incident where 7-year-old Briley was playing with a changing table and did not stop when Michael told her. This incident led to Michael blaming his wife, Tasha, for their children's behavior. He labeled them as the worst children in the world, who were disrespectful and awful. Michael not only blamed Tasha, but also called her fat and ugly, all in front of their 5 children. It was during this distressing incident that Tasha decided to pursue an exit strategy and file for divorce from Michael after 20 years of marriage. The incident, which showcased Michael's abusive behavior and lack of control over his anger, served as a wake-up call for Tasha. She saw the negative impact this behavior was having on her children and realized that staying in the marriage was not an option. Divorce was difficult for Tasha. She spent over 2 decades with Michael. However, she realized that her children's well-being and safety were more important than any marital bond. On December 21, 2022, Tasha filed for divorce from her husband Michael. However, she asked for the divorce papers to be delivered after the holidays, wanting one last normal Christmas for her 5 children before the separation. She knew that Michael's behavior would likely escalate once he received the papers, and she did not want the holiday festivities tarnished for everyone. The divorce papers were delivered to Michael's Allstate office 2 days after Christmas. Despite his recent actions, Michael called Tasha, acting completely normal, asking her about her day as if she hadn't served him with divorce papers mere minutes ago. He told Tasha to leave, but insisted that she leave the children behind, but Tasha stood her ground and refused to leave the house without them. Despite Michael's demands, Tasha decided to take the children with her to her mother's home in Laverkin, Utah. Later that evening, Michael showed up at his mother-in-law's house, attempting to convince Tasha to go for a ride with him. Tasha, however, refused and confided in her friends that she had a bad feeling about going anywhere alone with Michael. After Tasha filed for divorce, Gail Earle, Tasha's mother, moved in to provide support for both Tasha and the children. However, Michael's actions during this time further exacerbated the situation. Michael did not vacate the family home. Instead, he chose to move into the basement, where the fitness room was. In this room, he slept on a sleeping bag with a pillow on the floor, with his clothes hung on hangers piled on a couch outside the door. Tasha confided in her friends that she had noticed a discrepancy in their children's saving accounts, which contained $20,000. She discovered that Michael had secretly transferred the money out of these accounts without her knowledge or consent. Furthermore, Tasha inherited several firearms from her father after his death, including hunting rifles and a handgun. At the start of January 2023, Tasha discovered all the firearms were missing from her house. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that Michael had removed the weapons, leaving Tasha and her family vulnerable in case of an emergency. Michael and Tasha's oldest child, Macy, had expressed to several of her friends that she welcomed her parents' divorce. Macy confided that there would be peace without her father, Michael, in the home. She yearned for the tranquility that a divorce would bring. Furthermore, Macy had a secret phone that she hid in her room. According to one of her friends, Macy used this phone to record her father when he acted crazy. She confided in this friend that she was doing this to gather evidence to support her parents' divorce. However, Tasha found the phone and hid it away. Macy's younger sister, Briley, also endured a tumultuous home life. Due to the constant drama at home, Briley often sought refuge at her neighbor's house. This neighbor had grandchildren of a similar age, and Briley found solace in the company of these children. Briley disclosed to a friend that she was happy about her parents' impending divorce. She even mentioned purchasing some new books, but she refrained from telling her father out of fear that he might get angry with her. On January 3, 2023, Tasha met with her attorney to discuss her ongoing concerns about her divorce from her abusive husband, Michael. During their conversation, Tasha revealed that although Michael was still living in the family home, she was relieved that he had recently relocated to the basement. Given Michael's volatile behavior, the attorneys pressed Tasha on whether she ever experienced any concern for her or her children's safety. Despite Michael's occasional outbursts, Tasha reassured her attorneys that she never feared for her or her children's well-being. In hindsight, it is clear that Tasha's optimism and misplaced faith in her husband were tragically misplaced. The investigation into the Haight family shooting was a harrowing journey for police detectives as they pieced together the chilling sequence of events that led to the tragic outcome. One chilling discovery stood out amid the digital evidence collected from the family's computers and cell phones. On December 30th, mere days before the deadly shooting, Michael conducted a disturbing Google search. At 10:41 p.m., Michael's queries delved into firearms and shooting-related topics. These searches and other evidence gathered during the investigation painted a chilling picture of Michael's intentions. The search results revealed alarming questions such as, Michael expressed that he could not handle the situation for another day, and was determined to put an end to the manipulation and control he had been subjected to. Michael's note expressed deep frustration and desperation. He mentioned repeatedly asking for help, but no one seemed to listen. In this note, Michael emphasized his determination to not be a burden to society. The details of this case have left many in shock and disbelief, as it painted the picture of a deeply dysfunctional family plagued by violence. Michael's actions were premeditated and calculated. He carefully planned the murders, ensuring that his wife and children were unaware until it was too late. Story 8. On April 6, 2009, near Bridgend in South Wales, a truck driver pulled over to the shoulder of National Road A48. Just a few yards from the highway, at the bottom of a small ravine, he noticed an old suitcase partially concealed by tall grass. The unusual placement and shape of the suitcase sparked his curiosity. Deciding to inspect it, he unzipped the bag and was horrified to find a human hand. Shocked by the discovery, the driver immediately contacted emergency services. Kirsty Wilkinson was born on June 19, 1984, in Coventry, England. Her parents, David and Catherine Wilkinson, were already raising two daughters, Kirsty's older sisters, Sonia and Haley. The family enjoyed a close-knit atmosphere, fostering a sense of love and support among all members. Catherine shared an especially warm and trusting relationship with Kirsty. When Kirsty turned 14, family moved to Bridgend, South Wales. This marked a turning point in her life. The move coincided with her teenage years, introducing new social and emotional challenges. At her new school, quickly drew attention for her striking appearance and confident demeanor. Inspired by celebrities she saw in magazines, she began dreaming of a career in modeling. She imagined herself immersed in the world of fashion, surrounded by the spotlight and camera flashes. However, the reality proved more challenging. The modeling industry was highly competitive, and Kirsty struggled to establish a full-fledged career. Her work was limited to occasional amateur photo shoots, which brought little financial stability. Despite this, Kirsty displayed a strong sense of independence, taking on various part-time jobs from a young age. She worked as a waitress, cashier, and even cleaned houses to avoid relying on her parents. Financially, at 17, Kirsty's circumstances changed dramatically. Facing mounting expenses, she began working at an establishment in Bridgend known for its nightlife and adult entertainment. For Kirsty, this was less of a choice and more of a necessity. She kept this aspect of her life a secret from her family, fearing their judgment. To her mother and sisters, she claimed to work as an administrator for a local business. Using the pseudonym Megan to protect her identity, Kirsty tried to separate this part of her life from the rest of her world. The financial benefits of her new job were significant. She was able to afford her own apartment, cover personal expenses, and even save some of her earnings. However, Kirsty did not take pride in her work. The constant fear of exposure weighed heavily on her, and she struggled with feelings of shame and inner conflict. She longed for a way to leave that chapter of her life behind and start over on a clean slate. Despite her secret job, Kirsty maintained close ties with her family. Her parents saw her as responsible and goal-oriented, completely unaware of the real source of her financial independence. Kirsty continued to create the illusion of a stable and ordinary life, holding on to the hope that one day she could leave her double life behind and pursue her youthful dreams of normalcy and stability. Paul Gravitt was born in 1983 in South Wales. His childhood was marked by constant conflicts and financial instability. His parents frequently argued, often neglecting their son, which left Paul with a sense of being unwanted. From an early age, Paul displayed troubling behavior, clashing with teachers and peers and skipping school regularly. His academic performance was poor, and his parents' attempts to discipline him proved unsuccessful. By his teenage years, Paul began showing a tendency toward aggressive behavior. He was frequently involved in fights, and was openly disrespectful toward teachers. His reputation at school worsened until he eventually dropped out, leaving his education incomplete. Around this time, Paul developed an interest in prohibited substances. What began as experimentation with mild substances escalated over time to more severe addictions, which intensified his aggression and isolation. At 18, Paul started working in escort services. Seeking funds for his habits, he offered his services to both women and men. This line of work became his primary income source, but came with significant risks. Paul faced threats, aggression, and humiliation, fueling his anger and sense of injustice. This path also drew him into the criminal world, where he formed connections that enabled his destructive lifestyle to continue. Paul's behavior became increasingly hostile. One notable incident involved a dispute with a neighbor whom he accused of damaging his car. Paul not only threatened the woman, but also attacked her with a bat, forcing her to leave the neighborhood. Such incidents were not uncommon, and many people in his community avoided interacting with him. By the time Paul met Kirsty in 2004, he was living an isolated and chaotic life. Escort work, dependency on prohibited substances, and a proclivity for aggression had become central to his existence. His issues with anger management and manipulative tendencies often caused harm to those around him. When Kirsty met Paul, she couldn't foresee how his troubled past would lead to tragic consequences in her own life. In 2004, Kirsty Wilkinson and Paul Gravitt crossed paths at a party held in one of Bridgen's nightclubs. Kirsty was 20 years old, and Paul was 21. Both were at challenging points in their lives. Kirsty continued working at an establishment she kept secret from her family, while Paul was deeply entrenched in substance dependency and survived on a regular income from escort services. Despite their differences, a connection developed between them, initially based on mutual attraction. Their first meeting was purely coincidental. The party was loud and mutual friends introduced them to one another. Kirsty was drawn to Paul's confidence, while he was captivated by her appearance and charming smile. They spent the evening together, but it didn't lead to any serious commitments. After that night, they kept in touch occasionally, but didn't maintain a close relationship. For Kirsty, it was just a fleeting moment in her life with no promise of significant changes. Their connection rekindled at the end of 2007, 3 years after their initial encounter, under unusual circumstances. Paul, as a client, happened to visit the same establishment where Kirsty worked. She was using her pseudonym, Megan, but Paul recognized her and approached her for a conversation. Their initial exchange was awkward, but it soon turned into a friendly chat. Paul mentioned that he had often thought about her since their first meeting, and suggested they see each other outside of work. From that point, their relationship began to develop rapidly. They started spending more time together, going for walks and sharing personal stories. Kirsty, who had kept her professional life hidden from those close to her, found in Paul someone who seemed to understand and accept her without judgment. Paul, in turn, displayed confidence and charm, masking the troubled aspects of his past. Kirsty quickly started believing that Paul could be her prince, someone who would help her turn her life around. She was impressed by his talk of wanting to change his life and settle down to start a family. The understanding she thought they shared gave her hope that her life could improve. Paul skillfully fed into this romantic fantasy, often boasting about his alleged achievements, including past jobs as a mechanic, a race car driver, and even a dancer. However, despite the outward appearance of harmony, Their relationship was built on half-truths from the start. Paul knew about Kirsty's profession, but kept his true motives hidden. To him, she represented not just a romantic interest, but also a potential financial safety net. Kirsty, on the other hand, trusted in the sincerity of their bond and began to confide in Paul more than she had in anyone else. In December 2007, just weeks after reconnecting with Paul, Kirsty surprised her mother, Catherine, by announcing her engagement. According to Kirsty, Paul had proposed and she had accepted without hesitation. Kirsty believed she had found the man of her dreams, someone who would embrace her for who she was, despite her secret life. The news came as a complete shock to her family, as none of them were even aware of Paul's existence. Catherine immediately expressed her concerns. She felt the relationship was moving too quickly, and that Kirsty didn't know Paul well enough. She urged her daughter to delay the wedding to allow more time to understand Paul's character and intentions. Catherine suggested postponing the ceremony for at least a few months, but Kirsty was adamant. She and Paul had already chosen a date, February 2008. Just 5 weeks after their engagement announcement. The family's first meeting with Paul only heightened their concerns. When Kirsty brought him home, he made a poor impression. Paul appeared disheveled, dressed casually, and interacted with Kirsty's parents with a noticeable lack of respect. His stories about his life raised red flags. He claimed to have worked as a mechanic, a race car driver, and even a dancer, but none of these claims could be substantiated. It seemed as though Paul was trying to impress them by exaggerating his achievements. However, his tone and demeanor left Kirsty's family feeling uneasy. Kirsty's parents, Catherine and David, tried to dissuade her from rushing into the relationship. They pointed out that Paul seemed unreliable and that their relationship was progressing too quickly. Kirsty's older sister, Sonia, also voiced her concerns, remarking that Paul came across as manipulative. Despite their efforts to convince her otherwise, she firmly believed Paul was her only chance at a happy future. Kirsty had always been a dreamer and a romantic. From a young age, she envisioned a beautiful wedding and a large family. The lifestyle she had been leading left her feeling empty, and she hoped that marrying Paul would mark the beginning of a new chapter. Determined to follow her dream, she ignored all the warnings. She even convinced herself that her loved ones simply didn't understand her feelings. Despite their reservations, Kirsty's family chose to support her on her wedding day. The ceremony took place in February 2008. Her parents and sisters attended, though their smiles masked their unease. Paul, on the other hand, appeared pleased and confident. For Kirsty, it was the day her dreams came true, but for her family, it marked the start of her growing estrangement. They felt she was overlooking the troubling signs that would later lead to tragic consequences. After the wedding in February 2008, Kirsty and Paul began their life together in her apartment in Bridgend. From the outset, Paul imposed his own rules, which quickly escalated into complete control. He moved into Kirsty's home without discussion and immediately took charge of her finances. Paul insisted on gaining access to her bank account, claiming it was necessary to manage their money more effectively. Kirsty, still caught up in her romantic fantasy, didn't object. It soon became evident that Paul had no intention of contributing to their shared well-being. He made no effort to find a job and spent most of his time at home, while Kirsty continued working to support them both. Furthermore, Paul began interfering in her professional life. Instead of discouraging her work, he suggested she take on more clients to increase their income. To him, this was a way to cover their growing expenses, showing no regard for Kirsty's feelings or well-being. Paul's control extended beyond words. He began accompanying Kirsty to her workplace under the guise of ensuring her safety, but in reality, to monitor her schedule and ensure she met his demands. Over time, he started finding new clients for her online. Paul created multiple accounts on various platforms, advertising Kirsty's services. As a result, her workload became even more demanding. On top of her shifts at the establishment, she started meeting clients at home. This situation quickly became emotionally devastating for Kirsty. She had long dreamed of leaving her line of work, starting a fresh chapter, and building a family. However, under Paul's pressure, those dreams seemed unattainable. Despite her reluctance to continue, Paul used persuasion and manipulation to convince her that this was the only way to maintain their relationship and financial stability. He exploited her sense of responsibility and love for him as leverage. Paul's control was not limited to finances. He also began interfering in her personal life. He demanded explanations for her every move, checked her phone, and forbade her from speaking with certain friends. He insisted that some of them had a negative influence on their relationship. Gradually, Kirsty became isolated, left without support or anyone to confide in. The early signs of Paul's manipulative behavior included his attempts to undermine Kirsty's confidence. He made comments about her appearance, pointing out perceived flaws, and instilled the belief that she couldn't succeed without him. These remarks chipped away at her self-esteem, making her increasingly dependent on him. Paul also exhibited extreme mood swings, shifting from tenderness and care to irritation and aggression, further deepening Kirsty's sense of insecurity. As time passed, Paul became even more assertive. He began introducing others into their personal life under the pretext of adding variety to their relationship. Kirsty was firmly against this idea, but to avoid conflict, reluctantly agreed. However, such situations only deepened her internal turmoil. She began to feel as though her body and life no longer belonged to her. Kirsty tried to maintain the appearance of a normal family life, but inside, she was consumed by doubt and fear. Paul continued to assert his dominance, completely disregarding her feelings and needs. She frequently recorded her thoughts in a journal, but she lacked the strength to stand up against Paul's growing control. Her life had become a constant struggle to hold on to what little independence she had left, all while enduring relentless pressure and manipulation from Paul. Over time, Paul's controlling behavior escalated into overt aggression. The first instances of physical confrontations occurred a few months after the wedding. One evening, Paul, upset that Kirsty hadn't earned what he considered enough money, started an argument that turned into shoving and striking her. For Kirsty, it was a shocking experience, but Paul quickly apologized, promising it would never happen again. However, his apologies were merely temporary. Soon, these episodes became regular, and the severity increased. Paul began using aggression as a tool to break Kirsty's will. When she refused to comply with his demands, he would escalate from threats to physical actions. One such instance occurred when Kirsty attempted to discuss her desire to leave her job at the establishment. Paul rudely interrupted her, called her ungrateful, and struck her. Afterward, he tightened his control, further restricting her ability to make decisions independently. Kirsty's mother, Catherine, began suspecting that her daughter was unhappy in her marriage. She tried to have an open conversation with her, but Kirsty either avoided the topic or diverted the discussion. Sensing danger, Catherine warned her that Paul could pose a serious threat to her safety. However, Kirsty dismissed these concerns, convinced that she could change the situation with patience. Kirsty's inner doubts grew, but she clung to the hope that things might improve. Her diary entries revealed that she recognized the toxic nature of her marriage, but couldn't muster the strength to leave. Fear of the unknown, feelings of guilt, and her psychological dependence on Paul kept her trapped in a relationship that was steadily eroding her sense of self. On March 28, 2009, Kirsty and Paul decided to spend the evening with friends at a nightclub in Swansea. Throughout the night, they consumed alcohol and other substances, which was not unusual for them. According to witnesses, there were moments of tension between the couple, leading to periodic arguments. Paul appeared irritable, while Kirsty seemed to be avoiding conflict. The night culminated in a heated argument close to midnight, after which Paul left the party and went home alone, leaving Kirsty with their friends. Not wanting to follow him immediately, Kirsty decided to stay and finish the evening with her friends. They later described her as appearing tired and downcast, but trying not to show her emotions. Late that night, Kirsty called a cab to take her home. The taxi driver later stated that he dropped her off at the house, where she confidently walked inside. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. The following day, Paul told Kirsty's mother, Catherine, that his wife had left early that morning, supposedly taking some belongings and cash. He claimed he hadn't heard anything, because he was asleep. Paul also suggested that Kirsty might have gone to see another man. Catherine found his story suspicious, since Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and personal items, an unusual move for someone planning to start a new life. Another suspicious detail came to light when it was revealed that Kirsty had attempted to call emergency services during the night, but the call was disconnected due to a poor signal. Police later discovered that, around the time Kirsty allegedly left, neighbors reported hearing muffled screams and sounds of a struggle. These facts, combined with the lack of any evidence suggesting she left voluntarily, led her family and investigators to suspect foul play. After Kirsty was reported missing, the police immediately launched an investigation. The primary suspect was her husband, Paul Grabbitt, as his behavior had raised concerns from the start. Paul claimed he had been asleep during the night, and noticed the next morning that Kirsty had taken a few belongings and left. However, his version of events didn't align with the facts. Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and other important personal items, which contradicted the idea that she had left intentionally. During the initial search of their home, police noticed some suspicious changes. Part of the living room ceiling had been freshly painted, and a carpet that used to be in the room was missing. Paul explained this by saying Kirsty had wanted to redecorate, but the explanation seemed implausible. Neighbors reported hearing muffled cries, sounds of a struggle, and noise resembling the movement of a heavy object during the night. No one contacted the authorities at the time, assuming it was just a domestic argument. A crucial clue came from Kirsty's failed attempt to call emergency services on the night she disappeared. Investigators determined that the call was interrupted, but the fact that she tried to reach out for help suggested she was in danger. This, combined with the neighbors' testimonies, further heightened suspicions about Paul's involvement. On April 6, 2009, the investigation took a tragic turn. A truck driver who had pulled over on the shoulder of the A48 near Bridge End noticed a suitcase lying in a roadside ditch. The unusual appearance of the item caught his attention. Upon opening the suitcase, he discovered a human hand. Horrified, he immediately contacted the police. When officers arrived, they found the body of a woman inside the suitcase. Experts later identified the victim as Kirsty Wilkinson. An examination of the body revealed that Kirsty had suffered severe injuries. Her nose and jaw were broken, and her body showed numerous bruises and scratches. She died from a traumatic brain injury caused by repeated blows to the head. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation, indicating an attempt to asphyxiate her during the altercation. Investigators determined that her body had been moved from another location before being left in the ditch. On the same day, police arrested Paul. During interrogations, he denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of Kirsty's whereabouts after she left. However, his nervous demeanor raised further suspicion. Investigators also discovered that the day after Kirsty's disappearance, Paul used her bank card to withdraw money and visited a massage parlor, actions that appeared highly suspicious under the circumstances. Testimonies and forensic evidence revealed the tragic timeline of the crime. On the night of Kirsty's disappearance, an argument broke out between her and Paul. Paul attacked her, striking her multiple times and attempting to strangle her. After Kirsty's death, Paul moved her body to the living room, where he tried to fit it into a suitcase. Facing difficulties due to the size of her body, initially considered dismembering it, but abandoned the idea, lacking the necessary tools. Ultimately, he managed to force her body into the suitcase and transported it to a roadside ditch where he disposed of it. Later, traces of blood were found in Kirsty's home, which Paul had unsuccessfully tried to clean. Paint stains on the ceiling were discovered, covering splatter marks. These pieces of evidence, combined with witness accounts and Paul's behavior, became crucial in proving his guilt. Kirsty's diary entries further revealed her fear of Paul and her desire to leave, reinforcing the accusations against him. The trial of Paul Grabbitt began in early 2010. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline of events based on evidence collected by police and witness statements. Key pieces of evidence included the bloodstains in the living room, which Paul attempted to conceal by repainting the ceiling and removing the carpet. Forensic experts confirmed the blood matched Kirsty's and indicated a violent confrontation. Injuries on her body showed signs of severe aggression. Witnesses, including neighbors, reported hearing sounds of a struggle and muffled cries from the house on the night Kirsty disappeared. A taxi driver confirmed he dropped Kirsty off at her home shortly before her death. Police presented records of Kirsty's call to emergency services that failed due to a poor signal, indicating she had tried to seek help. Another critical piece of evidence was Paul's use of Kirsty's bank card for transactions, including withdrawing money and visiting a massage parlor after her death. During the trial, Kirsty's diary entries were read aloud. In them, She described her fear of Paul, his manipulative behavior, and his aggression. These records painted a picture of a life filled with control, intimidation, and financial exploitation. Prosecutors emphasized how Paul dominated Kirsty's life, disregarding her safety and well-being. Paul denied any wrongdoing, claiming Kirsty left their home voluntarily, and suggesting her death was caused by an unknown person. However, his account was contradicted by evidence and witness statements. Investigators also uncovered that Paul had attempted to craft an image of a carefree husband, telling others that Kirsty had run off with another man. After a lengthy trial, the jury found Paul guilty of committing the crime. The judge highlighted the exceptional cruelty of the act, its selfish motives, and Paul's complete lack of remorse. On February 4, 2010, Paul Grabbit was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. While the sentence brought some relief to Kirsty's family, it could not undo their devastating loss. The trial revealed details about Kirsty's life that her family had never known. They were overwhelmed with grief and guilt, believing they could have prevented the tragedy. For them, the proceedings were not only the conclusion of the case, but also a painful reminder of the devastating impact of toxic relationships and control. After Kirsty's death, the Wilkinson family was left deeply scarred, both emotionally and psychologically. Her mother, Catherine, struggled with a constant sense of guilt. She replayed in her mind all the warnings she had given Kirsty, the words her daughter had ignored, and her gut feeling that Paul was a danger to her. These thoughts consumed her, amplifying the pain of the loss. Kirsty's father, David, withdrew into himself, avoiding any discussions about the tragedy. Losing their youngest daughter shattered the unity of their family. Kirsty's older sister, Haley, was profoundly affected by her death. The two had always been close, and the loss left a void in Haley's life that she struggled to fill. Unable to cope with the growing weight of her depression and feelings of helplessness, Haley turned to alcohol in an attempt to numb the pain. 5 years after Kirsty's death, Haley passed away from alcohol poisoning at the age of just 31. This second tragedy struck the Wilkinson family with another devastating blow, leaving them mourning yet another daughter. For Sonia, Kirsty's other sister, the loss was a harsh lesson on the importance of protecting loved ones. She tried to support her parents, but carried her own deep sense of sorrow. The Wilkinson family was left with a wound that no verdict or sentence could heal. The tragedy destroyed their lives, leaving behind a lasting mark that they would carry with them forever. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper. Thank you for joining me here at Mr. Night Scared. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware, even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.